Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa was born on May 29, 1977, in La Fortuna, San Carlos, in Alajuela, Costa Rica. She was the youngest of 5 children in a humble family. From an early age, she was ambitious and determined. She wanted to help people and dreamed of becoming a doctor, telling herself she would be the first in her family to get a college degree. During her school years, she excelled in chemistry and biology, her favorite subjects. After graduating in 1994, she was accepted into the country's most prestigious medical school, located in San Jose. As a student, Maria moved to the capital and lived there for the rest of her life. However, she still maintains a close relationship with her family, visiting and get in touch with them. In 2000, after earning her degree, Maria began working as an anesthesiologist at one of the largest medical centers in the capital. She quickly excelled in her career, continuously learning and honing her skills. By 2015, she had risen to become the head of the anesthesiology and recovery therapy department. She was highly respected and admired by her colleagues, become a famous doctor. However, to achieve success, Maria had to trade in her personal life. For many years, she was alone, fully dedicated to her work. In 2017, at the age of 40, she started dating a doctor at the same hospital, though he worked in a different department. She believed he was her true love and someone with whom she could build a happy family. Unfortunately, at the start of 2020, their relationship ended, and he started dating a younger co-worker. The breakup was a painful experience for Maria. She suffered from severe depression and focused only on work for months, barely paying attention to the world around her. Her only source of comfort was her small dog, Mafalda, she loved and cared for as if he were her child. In July 2020, Maria felt like she needed some time off and change your living environment to relax your mind. She decided to visit the coast and stay at a small, cozy hotel called La Mansion Inn, located in the picturesque Punta Arenas region. Before, this resort attracted tourists from around the world, but now this place is very deserted. At the hotel, only a few rooms were occupied, which provided the peace and quiet Maria was seeking. She planned to spend the weekend there and return home on Monday, bringing her beloved dog Mafalda along with her. Maria stayed in a room on the ground floor, has a second door leading to a private yard. These rooms are designed for guests with pets, so it can go outside and relieve themselves in a designated area. At the time, all the other rooms with courtyard access were unoccupied. On July 18, Maria arrived, left her belongings in her room, and went to the beach. The following day was equally uneventful. She walked along the shore, relaxed in the sun, had dinner at a restaurant, and returned to her room. That evening, she called her mother, and they talked for about 30 minutes. During the call, Maria remarked on how empty the hotel felt, with only a handful of staff members. She intended to check out the next morning, after breakfast, but she never did. On the morning of July 20, Maria did not come down for breakfast. The hotel staff noticed her absence, as there were very few guests, but assumed she was simply sleeping. However, when checkout time arrived, and she still hadn't appeared, they decided to check her room. 2 staff members knocked on her door but received no response. They could hear her dog barking inside, which confirmed she was there. Despite repeatedly knocking and calling her name, the only sound was the dog's barking. Concerned, they went to the courtyard to see if they could access her room from another entrance. They found the second door unlocked and decided to go inside to see what was going on. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed brownish stains on the floor, resembling dried blood. On the bed, they discovered a body wrapped in a sheet. The staff immediately contacted emergency services and informed hotel management. Unfortunately, when paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Maria was dead. She had been killed several hours before her body was discovered. The scene was deeply unsettling, from the condition of the room to the circumstances surrounding her death. Maria's body showed multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks inflicted by different individuals. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated she had fought back desperately. The cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxia and a broken neck. She had been strangled with such force that her cervical vertebrae were fractured. The autopsy confirmed that Maria had been sexually assaulted before her death. Beside her bed, there was a bottle of mineral water, an opened bottle of expensive wine, and 2 glasses. According to hotel staff, she had ordered these items the previous night, but she was alone at the time. Maria's keycard records show that after she received the items, she did not leave the room and no one entered. However, the glass door leading to the courtyard did not require a key, which could have allowed the attacker to gain access. The hotel had several security cameras that could have helped shed some light on the matter, but it turned out they had all been out of service for months. The hotel management explained that they had cut costs by shutting off the cameras. Forensic experts analyzed the bite marks on Maria's body for DNA, expecting to find the attacker's saliva. However, the results were shocking. The saliva belonged to Maria herself. Since the bite marks were located on her face, neck, and chest, areas she could not have reached herself, investigators deduced that the attacker had deliberately placed her saliva on the wounds to conceal their own DNA. Another disturbing detail revealed by the pathologist was that Maria's body had been thoroughly cleaned after her death. This indicated that after torturing, strangling, and killing her, the attackers washed her body in the bathroom, placed her back on the bed, contaminated the bite marks with her saliva, and wrapped her body in a sheet. Because the hotel's cameras were not working and the grounds were very deserted, no witnesses could be identified. Both guests and hotel staff reported that they did not see anything unusual, and they did not see any strangers appearing on the premises. The brutal murder of Maria, a famous anesthesiologist, quickly became the focus of national attention, causing great public outrage. Police are under pressure to investigate and find the culprit who committed the brutal act against an innocent woman. When asked if Maria might have had a brief romance during the trip, her family firmly denied it. She was still heartbroken over a recent breakup and had been hoping for reconciliation. Regarding the 2 glasses found in the room, Maria's sister explained that she always used 2 glasses, one for wine and one for water. Forensic analysis confirmed this explanation, as only Maria's fingerprints and lip marks were found on the glasses. During their interview with the police, her mother suddenly remembered something from her daughter's last phone call. Maria had mentioned chatting with a man who worked at the hotel during lunch. She said he had asked her why she was traveling alone and how long she planned to stay. This detail provided detectives with their first suspect to investigate. The employee in question was 38 years old, Teodoro Herrera, the son of a close friend of the hotel owner, Harry Baudin. In fact, thanks to his father's connection with Harry, he got the job at the hotel. He worked as a bartender and also ran personal errands for Harry. During his interview with the police, he behaved oddly. He was extremely nervous. He claimed that he did not know Maria and did not remember ever speaking to her. Detectives noticed fresh scratches on Teodoro's cheeks and neck, for which he couldn't provide a clear explanation. When asked to remove his shirt, similar scratches were found on his chest and shoulders. Investigators suspected these marks were left by Maria as she fought for her life, but they needed forensic confirmation. He was arrested and held for 6 months while the investigation continued. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood and skin particles from Teodoro were found under Maria's nails. However, the bite marks on her body did not match his dental impressions. The investigation then shifted focus to a 36-year-old man named Luis Carlos Miranda. He was not a regular guest or employee at La Mansion Inn, but he was a friend of the hotel owner, Harry, and often stayed there for free. One of the bite marks on Maria's body was potentially linked to he, though it wasn't conclusive. Still, the police arrested him as a second suspect and detained him for 6 months, just like Teodoro. He also denied ever meeting Maria or having any interaction with her. About 10 days after the murder, a third suspect was arrested, Harry Baudin, the 69-year-old hotel owner. Harry, a businessman of Dutch origin, was well connected with politicians. He owned multiple properties across different countries. His arrest was prompted by a bite mark on Maria's body that matched his dental impressions. Investigators also discovered that about 6 months before the murder, he had undergone surgery at the hospital where Maria worked. Although he claimed he had never met her, police suspected he might have noticed her during his hospital stay, obtained her contact information, and lured her to his hotel. Initially, Harry was placed under house arrest due to his age and health problems. However, when he moved to a new residence without informing the authorities, he was taken into custody over concerns he might attempt to flee the country. Another individual connected to the case was Harry's husband, Yater Daniel Abanda. However, no evidence was found to convict him. He denied any involvement, stating that Harry had been unwell that night and had not left their room. After reviewing the autopsy and forensic results, investigators determined that there were 3 attackers involved. There were no signs of ropes or restraints used to hold down Maria, but all her limbs displayed bruises consistent with being pinned by hands. Fabric fibers and a thread were discovered inside her mouth, indicating she had been gagged. This likely explains why none of the other guests or staff heard her screams, although her injuries and signs of torture showed that she must have been desperately calling for help. On Maria's phone, found in her room, there were messages to her sister in which she praised the hotel. She described it as beautiful, cozy, and quiet, complimenting the staff for being attentive. She also mentioned spending the evening chatting and dancing at the bar with the man who served coffee, identified as Teodoro. From the start, Teodoro was the main suspect. He was the only suspect of the 3 with visible scratches, and forensic evidence revealed his skin and blood under Maria's fingernails. Additionally, his DNA was found on her body, despite his attempts to wash it off. However, dental cast comparisons showed that his teeth did not match the bite marks on her skin. After returning to her room, Maria stayed in her room all evening and didn't allow anyone inside. Investigators suspected the attackers entered through the door leading to the courtyard. It's possible she left the door unlocked for her dog to go outside. Since the neighboring rooms were unoccupied, no one would have noticed. Once inside, the attackers acted quickly. They struck Maria on the head, rendering her unconscious, gagged her, and then subjected her to hours of torture and assault. Afterward, they strangled her with such force that her neck was broken. They then washed her body in the bathroom, placed it on the bed, and wrapped it in a sheet, dirtying the bite wound with her saliva. During the trial, all 3 suspects, Teodoro, Harry, and Luis, denied involvement, claiming they were asleep in their rooms that night. However, no witnesses could corroborate their alibis. Investigators found disturbing text messages on their phones in which they shared frightening thoughts. The day before the crime, they even discussed a guest who was alone. The trial is set for September 2022, more than 2 years after the murder. Harry, 71, had to appear in court in a wheelchair because of worsening knee problems that made it difficult for him to walk. The prosecution immediately had difficulty proving Harry and Luis's involvement in the crime. The evidence against them was largely circumstantial, consisting of text messages and dental impressions. The defense argued that the bite marks should be dismissed as evidence because they did not perfectly match their dental records. To support this argument, Harry's lawyer hired an orthodontist from Madrid to testify. After analyzing the bite marks on Maria's body, orthodontist concluded that they were insufficient as evidence and could not definitively establish a link between Harry, Luis, and the crime. However, after orthodontist returned to Spain the following day, the prosecution questioned his credentials. Further investigation confirmed that he did not have a valid certificate and was merely a self-proclaimed expert. As a result, his testimony was discredited. and thrown out. Despite this, the prosecution was determined to prove a connection between Harry, Louise, and the case. They argued that the brutal, calculated nature of the assault and murder indicated the involvement of at least 3 people. The defense denied this claim, insisting that a healthy individual was perfectly capable of performing the act without assistance. The verdict was delivered with clear and undeniable evidence, all pointing to Teodoro Herrera as the culprit. His DNA was found in Maria's body. His skin cells appeared under her fingernails, and her blood was discovered both on the outside and inside of his shoes. The shoe prints matched those found at the entrance of her room and near the bed. Consequently, he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole. At 40 years old, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. He admitted to being intimate with Maria that night, but claimed it was consensual and insisted someone else must have killed her after he left. In contrast, there was insufficient evidence against Harry and Louise. Apart from bite marks and text messages, nothing concrete linked them to the crime. As a result, they were acquitted and released in March 2023. However, in September of the same year, an appeals court revisited the case after a complaint from Maria's family and ordered it to be reopened. By then, Harry and Louise had already fled Costa Rica, leaving the country immediately after their release. They are currently living in the Netherlands, and even if the trial is reopened and they are found guilty, they will not face any consequences because the Netherlands and Costa Rica do not have an extradition treaty, even though this is a very serious crime. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Johnny Aberry. Johnny Aberry was born on August 26, 1983 in the small town of Bristol, Tennessee, USA. She is cheerful, friendly, has many friends, and often goes to parties. While in school, Johnny was a member of the local cheerleading squad. After graduating from high school, she studied psychology and criminology at East Tennessee State University. While in college, she met Jason White, they became a couple, and they got engaged before graduating in late 2004. When Johnny was 21, she decided to continue her studies to get a master's degree in psychology, so she temporarily moved to Knoxville. While studying, she worked part-time at a child education center and realized her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, studied law in another state. Despite the distance, they kept in touch and planned their wedding. While in Knoxville, Johnny stayed at a classmate Jason Amami's apartment. They had attended college together and moved to Knoxville together. They shared a 2-bedroom apartment, and Johnny stayed until she found her own place. Johnny had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and one at a children's hospital. On the evening of Sunday, December 5th, after working at the store, Johnny went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got home, she wrapped presents for the children at the daycare center, chatted with her neighbors, and then went to her room. Before going to sleep, she talked to her boyfriend. Around 4 a.m., Jason Amami heard Johnny screaming. He thought Johnny was having a nightmare, so he went into her room, but instead of Johnny, Jason Amami saw a stranger holding a knife. The stranger attacked Jason Amami, and they struggled. He eventually pushed the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, about a mile away, to call for help. The store clerk found him covered in blood and called 911. The police arrived at Jason Amami and Johnny's apartment and found Johnny in the hallway connecting 5 apartments. She was still alive but barely conscious. When asked about her attacker, she gave only vague clues. The police searched the entire building and the surrounding area but could not find the attacker. They took Jania to the nearest hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts, she died. The doctor said that Jania had suffered more than 20 stab wounds and that her chances of survival were slim. Meanwhile, Jason Amami had suffered 8 injuries from the attacker, but only one was serious. He was treated and his life was not in danger. At the same time, detectives began investigating the scene. They found blood in the hallway, indicating that Jania had tried to call for help from neighbors, but no one answered the door. Near Jania's room, they found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife owned by Jason Amami. The attacker used the knife with such force that it was bent and damaged. Police also found blood stains near the back door and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason Amami and Jania had left through the front door, detectives believe the killer escaped through the back door. In Jason Amami's room, they found another clue, partial footprints that the attacker may have left while stalking and attacking Jason Amami. Because of the brutality of Jania's death, police suspected a personal motive behind the crime. Initially, detectives investigated Jania's boyfriend, even though he lived about 1,000 miles away in Knoxville. However, all of his friends and family said that Jania and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship and that he had no reason to commit such a brutal act. He learned of Jania's death when her mother called at 10 a.m. to tell him. He said he fainted when he heard the news and it took him a long time to regain consciousness. Unable to do anything, he asked his neighbors to help him book a plane ticket and prepare his luggage. Investigators looked closely at Jason White's alibi and realized that he could not have made it to Knoxville and back in the morning by himself. So they eliminated him as a suspect and turned their attention to Jania's neighbor. This neighbor did not have a solid alibi and had been in the apartment with Jania, raising suspicions that he could be the culprit. Jania's friends and family also suspected this neighbor. Some believed that he could be the killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Jania behind. The suspicions were so deep that the victim's parents did not even want him to attend her funeral. However, after Jason Amami was discharged from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his original story. He heard screaming, saw a strange man, and was attacked by him. After fighting off the attacker, Jason Amami ran to the front door and onto the street, seeking help from neighbors. He believed that Jania had also escaped from the apartment because he could not hear her screams. However, police had doubts about Jason Amami's story. What initially raised suspicions about Jason Amami were his injuries. 7 of the 8 were superficial, and the last wound to his right arm could have been self-defense or the result of an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the perpetrator may have been someone Jania knew. Jason Amami claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night but did not remember locking it. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to the door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason Amami insisted that he had exited through the front door, but police suspected that he might be lying. If Jason Amami had indeed left through the front door, that would not have explained the presence of bloodstains near the back door, further raising suspicions against him. Police accused Jason Amami of using and selling illegal drugs, and of being aggressive when he could not satisfy his addiction. However, he denied all of these allegations. After hours of questioning at the police station, detectives suggested that Jason Amami take a polygraph test. Jason Amami agreed to take the test. The results showed that he gave false answers, which made detectives even more suspicious of him. However, detectives were still unable to charge him with murder due to a lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for lab experts to complete testing on some of the evidence found in the apartment. They then discovered some key evidence, including 3 DNA samples on the murder knife, samples from Jania, Jason Amami, and an unidentified man. The unidentified man's DNA was also found in Jania's room, on the back door handle, and on the stairs the criminal used to escape to the street. They also found a fingerprint on the handle of the knife, but it did not match Jason Amami's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to suspect that someone else had been in the apartment that night. However, when they ran the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no match. This complicated the case further, and detectives had to continue investigating to find the real killer. Investigators have ruled out Jason Amami as a suspect, but the public remains uncertain about his role in the incident. They believe that Jason Amami abandoned his friend and ran away instead of protecting her. However, it is worth noting that after the accident, Jason Amami began to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. A key finding was later revealed: the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was no indication that Jason Amami was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence that Jason Amami was involved with illegal substances. They eventually concluded that this was used as leverage to frame him. More importantly, however, doctors initially underestimated the severity of Jason Amami's injuries. In fact, he had suffered severe damage to his lungs and neck, with little hope of a full recovery. Due to inaccurate information reported about Jason Amami's health, the insurance company only covered 25% of his medical expenses, leaving Jason Amami facing serious financial hardship. After eliminating Jason as a suspect, police began questioning him as a witness. Based on Jason's testimony, they attempted to create a rough description of the attacker. However, this was made more difficult by the fact that Jason could not see the attacker's face clearly. The apartment was too dark and the attacker lunged at him as soon as he entered the room. Investigators also discovered several suspicious items in the room, including a hat, a record player, and a stereo near the back stairs. At first, they thought these items might belong to Jania or Jason, but Jason denied owning them. This led them to suspect that these items might have been left behind by the killer. Police shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and they subsequently received hundreds of calls from the public. Many people reported individuals who matched the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One of the prominent clues led investigators to a group of teenagers who had broken into homes with the intention of burglarizing. One member of the group, a 19-year-old named Michael, matched the sketch of the suspect. The police began searching for Michael, but this was not easy because he was wanted for burglary. 2 police units joined the search for him, and they eventually found Michael. When interrogating Michael, investigators immediately noticed his shoes, which had a pattern similar to the footprints left by the killer. They collected Michael's DNA and fingerprints and sent them to experts for analysis. During the interrogation, Michael revealed a surprising piece of information: he and a friend had entered Jania's apartment that night. According to Michael, they planned to rob, but his friend attacked Jania with a knife. However, detectives soon discovered inconsistencies in Michael's story. The details he provided did not match the actual events, and there was no evidence of 2 strangers at the crime scene. Michael's DNA and fingerprints also did not match the evidence at the scene. Michael's shoes also did not match the tread pattern in Jason's room. Investigators concluded that Michael had made up the story. This is not uncommon, as some people may falsely confess to crimes in order to seek attention or reward. Michael's motives remained unclear, but his story was completely untrue. Police subsequently interviewed more than 1,000 potential suspects and collected about 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence at the scene. Early in the murder investigation, authorities offered a reward for information leading to a solution to the case. The reward grew each month, and by December 2005, it had reached $60,000. The governor then added another $20,000 to bring the case to the attention of the public. Despite many clues, all were dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for many years. In 2007, Jania's parents decided to take matters into their own hands by looking into changes in state law. They noticed that the killer's fingerprints and DNA did not appear in any databases, which raised suspicions about his brutality. They assumed that the killer had a criminal record, so they investigated Tennessee law. Through their investigation, they discovered that, according to Tennessee law, fingerprints and DNA samples could only be collected from convicted criminals. So Jania's parents expressed their desire to change this law. They played a key role in drafting a new law that required fingerprints and DNA samples to be collected from all people arrested for violent crimes. After gaining support from the government, the law was passed in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred. Police arrested 22-year-old Taylor Lee Olson for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a criminal record, including theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and had been arrested several times. Surprisingly, however, police had never collected his fingerprints or DNA. Olson lived with his girlfriend and newborn daughter, but he continued to commit crimes. 5 months earlier, police had begun investigating Olson for his suspected involvement in the murder of Jania. However, they had not been able to analyze his DNA at the time. But after Olson was arrested for violating his probation, police decided to question him about the details of the Jania case. Olson eventually confessed to his role in the murder and voluntarily provided a DNA sample. The DNA test showed that Olson's sample matched the one found in the victim's apartment. Additionally, Olson's fingerprints matched the fingerprints on the murder weapon. Olson claimed that he intended to steal Jania's car that night and entered the apartment through the back door to look for the keys. When he entered Jania's room, she woke up and began screaming. In a panic, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked her multiple times. Olson insisted that he had no intention of killing anyone and that the incident was an unfortunate accident. Investigators were suspicious of some of the details and suspected that Taylor had planned to kill Jania in advance. They believed that he may have been following Jania for some time, which was supported by Jania's friends reporting that someone was following her in a car at the time. Although there was no concrete evidence to prove this became more credible after Olson was arrested. When Olson's trial was scheduled to begin in mid-2008, he hired an attorney. His attorney advised him to withdraw his original confession, and Olson gave a new account to investigators. According to this new account, Olson claimed that he had entered Jania's apartment with his friend, Noah Cox. When Olson entered Jania's room to get his car keys, Jania allegedly woke up, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Olson multiple times. Olson then fled through the back door while his friend entered Jania's room, disarmed Jania, and killed her. Taylor Olson's new story raised suspicions among police. They found no fingerprints or DNA of others at the crime scene, leading them to believe that no one else was involved. Detectives waited for the trial to begin, but it never did. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson committed suicide in his jail cell. Along with him, detectives found several suicide notes addressed to his family, Jania's relatives, and the police. In the letter to detectives, he accused his friend Noah Cox of being the real culprit and apologized to Jania's family and his family. However, detectives still believed that Olson was responsible for the murders. They questioned Noah several times but found no evidence implicating him. Jania's parents were also skeptical of Olson's final confession. They felt that if Olson was truly innocent, he would not have committed suicide. Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone for months after his initial confession. His sudden change in story to blame his friend raised further suspicions. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Romina Celeste Núñez. Romina Celeste Núñez was born in 1990 in Asunción, the capital of Paraguay. She is the oldest of two daughters. After her parents' divorce at a young age, her mother, Miriam Rodriguez, single-handedly raised the girls. Despite her ex-husband's lack of financial support and interest in their daughters, Miriam worked several jobs to support her family financially. When she was still a schoolgirl, Romina got a job in order to help her mother and younger sister. At 17, she began a dating relationship with a man named Christopher. He pursues her romantically and they make plans for the future together. When Romina discovered she was pregnant, she informed Christopher. Rather than being supportive, he gave her a difficult choice. She had to decide between ending the pregnancy or breaking up with him. Romina was deeply hurt by Christopher's words, but she sought the advice of her parents. After their discussion, she decided to keep the child. Her main concern was that if she had an abortion at such a young age, she might never be able to become a mother again. Romina felt she had no other choice. Her lover, Christopher, ended all contact with Romina, never showing any interest in her or their child's future. At 18 years old, Romina gave birth to a son named Lucas. However, the arrival of the baby made their already difficult financial situation even worse. Money was scarce, and Romina's mother had to support both her daughter and her grandson. Desperate to improve their situation, Romina moved to Spain, hoping to find better job opportunities. However, in Paraguay, she struggled to find a decent job with good pay. She then reached out to her maternal aunt, who lived in Spain, and the aunt invited Romina to join her. Romina's aunt reassured her that settling in Europe, particularly in Spain, would be easier and offered more opportunities. Romina made a quick decision and packed her essentials. She bought a plane ticket to Spain and set off, leaving her 2-year-old son with her mother and younger sister temporarily. She planned to reunite with her son once she found a new home and a stable job. In the late summer of 2010, Romina flew to Madrid and then traveled to the nearby town of Alcobendas, where her aunt took her in. Romina quickly started looking for work and was lucky. She landed a job as a hotel administrator, earning a decent salary. She sent some of the money back home and used the rest to rent her own apartment, not wanting to be a burden to her relatives. It wasn't long before Romina met a man named Javier, with whom she had a passionate romance. Javier was also an immigrant, having left El Salvador a few years prior in search of a better life. He worked in construction and seemed like a good partner. Romina's situation became complicated when she became pregnant. Despite this, she and Javier tried to make their relationship work. However, after the birth of their son, they eventually broke up. The breakup left Romina in a difficult position as a single parent in a foreign country with no clear direction. Romina's aunt provided temporary support by letting her stay with her. A few months later, when her son was around 6 months old, she went back to work due to financial necessity. However, her life took another turn for the worse. Initially, she ignored her poor health, attributing it to stress and exhaustion. Eventually, she visited a doctor and was diagnosed with cancer. She underwent multiple rounds of chemotherapy, which caused significant physical changes, including hair loss and weight loss. Despite these challenges, she bravely battled the disease and eventually overcame it. Following her treatment, Romina made a quick recovery and continued to work. She used wigs to hide her hair loss. Romina believed she had overcome the toughest challenges and was now due for a happy time. After saving money, she planned a trip to Spain with her eldest son, mother, and younger sister. During the summer of 2017, Romina attended an event with friends and met a man named Raul Diaz. Raul Diaz makes a strong impression with his attractive appearance, stable career, and solid financial situation. Smitten by Romina's beauty, he asked mutual friends about her and showed interest. Romina also found Raul appealing and agreed to go on a date with him. Raul, nearly 15 years older than Romina, worked as a lead process engineer at a major energy company. He had 2 failed marriages and 2 teenage daughters from previous relationships. Despite their age difference and complicated pasts, Romina felt no intimidation. As a single mother raising sons from 2 previous relationships, Romina felt a connection with Raul. After their first date, the couple knew they were meant to be and didn't want to be apart. Romina was overjoyed, and her excitement was contagious as she shared her feelings with her friends. Raul showered her with thoughtful gestures daily, including surprise gifts, romantic getaways, and heartfelt compliments. She truly believed she had found her soulmate, someone who would love and accept her and her sons unconditionally. However, Romina bliss was short-lived as disturbing rumors about Raul began to surface. She heard that he had been abusive and cruel to his previous spouses, which ultimately led to the breakdown of both his marriages. Despite her concerns, Romina initially chose to disregard these rumors. Despite the significant age gap between them, and each having children from previous relationships, they decided to continue their relationship. Just 6 months into their relationship, they decided to cohabitate and settled into a luxurious villa on the beautiful island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. To Romina, this place was like a real heaven, but her happiness was short-lived. Raul, the man she once thought was her ideal partner, gradually became an brute and controlling man in the family. The 3 of them, Romina, her youngest son, and Raul, struggled to live together in harmony. Raul attempted to present himself as a husband and good father. And Romina even thought he would be the ideal father for her children. He promised her a long and happy life together, where he would fully support her and the children, leaving them wanting for nothing. Believing Raul's words, Romina agreed to marry him when he proposed. However, Raul wanted them to have some private time after the wedding, to they enjoy their time together. In fact, Raul wanted to take Romina's oldest child out of Paraguay and also wanted to get rid of her youngest son. Romina trusted Raul, despite her friends' concerns about his unusual behavior. In June 2018, her fiancé, Raul, bought tickets for Romina and her child to travel to Paraguay, but purchased a return ticket only for the Romina. When Romina returned home, she told her mother and younger sister about Raul, but they were skeptical of his intentions, suspecting he might be trying to get rid of her child. This led to a disagreement between Romina and her loved ones. A few days later, Romina returned to Spain, she promising to return in the fall. Upon Romina's return, she was warmly welcomed and experienced 2 months of happiness with Raul. However, in August, just a few days before their wedding, he brutally attacked her. This incident shocked Romina, but Raul begged for forgiveness on his knees, promising it wouldn't happen again. Believing him, Romina didn't report the incident to the police and kept it a secret. On August 10th, she held a wedding with Raul, covering up her bruises and marrying the man who would later take her life. 2 weeks after her wedding, Romina traveled back to Paraguay for a brief visit with her family, rather than to pick up her sons as she had originally intended. Romina's mother and younger sister were shocked by the changes they saw in her. Romina seemed upset and lost, had a noticeable limp, and bruises on her neck, which she tried to conceal with a scarf. When asked about her condition, Romina would remain silent or claim the injuries were caused by an accident. Romina told her family that her husband suggested the visit, as she had not seen her children in a while and missed them dearly. Her mother, Miriam, even praised her son-in-law for his kindness. However, Miriam still sensed something was wrong and was concerned about her daughter's unhappiness. Romina spent almost a month at home, which surprised her family, especially since she had just gotten married. Eventually, in mid-September, she secretly borrowed money from relatives for a return ticket to Spain. This was because her husband refused to pay for her trip back. This should have been a warning, but Romina still held on to the hope that her marriage would ultimately be happy. Romina's mother, younger sister, and 2 sons last saw her at the airport on September 17th. After returning to her husband, Romina's life gradually turned into a nightmare. It was eventually revealed that her husband, Raul, was addicted to drugs and no longer hid his addiction from her. While under the influence, he became violent and tortured her. Although Raul repeatedly abused Romina, whenever she tried to leave him, he would make promises to change and vow that the abuse would not happen again. After each incident, there will be a brief period of peace, during which Raul will show affection, where Raul would show affection, give gifts, and plan romantic dates. However, over time, these lulls became shorter, and the episodes of violence occurred more often. Just before the new year, Romina confided in her best friend about her fear of Raul, believing he might one day kill her. On December 29th, Raul severely beat Romina, forcing her to seek medical attention. Hospital staff suspected something was wrong and wanted to report the matter to the police. However, Raul intervened, claiming Romina had injured herself and denying any wrongdoing. Romina she refused hospitalization, choosing to go home instead. On January 1st, 2019, Miriam, Romina's mother, attempted to reach her daughter by phone multiple times, but Romina didn't answer. Concerned, Miriam then called her daughter's spouse, Raul, but he didn't answer either. After several days of not hearing from her daughter, Miriam sent a message to Raul stating that she was going to report this to the police if she didn't get any feedback. Raul immediately responded by calling Miriam back and explaining that he and Romina had an argument on December 31st. Following the argument, Romina packed her belongings and left him. Raul assured Miriam that Romina was just upset and would return once she cooled down, as she had done before, in similar situations. However, Miriam was not convinced by Raul's explanation and suspected that something may have happened to her daughter. She insisted that Raul go to the police to report the situation. Raul did not report his wife's disappearance until January 8th, and only did so because her relatives pressured him to take action. However, his story was different this time. He claimed his wife had taken his money after they quarreled and might have traveled to Paraguay to visit their children. Raul's testimony was inconsistent and contradictory, fueling further questions and doubts. As a result, law enforcement took a closer look at Raul and the couple's life. After interviewing friends and relatives, they uncovered signs of a troubled marriage. Romina had confided in loved ones about Raul's abusive behavior. Others had noticed bruises and injuries on her body, leading them to suspect that something more serious was going on. Raul was placed under secret surveillance, and his phone calls were tapped. Despite this, he seemed to know that he was being watched and was extremely cautious for a long time. The investigation continued, and investigators soon discovered a crucial piece of information. On December 29th, Romina was taken to the hospital with severe signs of beatings, but her husband forbade her from reporting the incident to the police. This incident did not happen just once, as Romina had reported domestic violence a few months ago, but she withdrew the report the next day. Raul eventually let his guard down during a phone conversation with a police officer who was a relative. In this conversation, he claimed that his wife was no longer alive and that her body would never be found. This is an important lead in the case, and Raul was arrested as the main suspect. He was then taken in for an interrogation. During questioning, Raul claiming that on New Year's Eve, Romina had become intoxicated and demanded that he move her children into their home immediately. When he refused, Romina became aggressive, throwing objects at him and starting a fight. Raul claimed that he left the house to calm down, but returned a couple of hours later to find Romina unresponsive in the bathtub. Raul claimed Romina died from suffocation due to being heavily intoxicated, but he was afraid of being suspected of being her killer. As a result, Raul attempted to conceal the evidence and decided to remove all traces and then report her disappearance. However, everyone was amazed at the way he handled the body. Raul claimed that he burned Romina's body in a barbecue area located in a private courtyard of their upscale residential complex. He believed the private location would prevent neighbors from seeing or smelling the burning body. Unfortunately for Raul, a barbecue is not an efficient tool for burning a body, and the remains were still intact after a few hours. He then took out the remains, dismembered the body, packed them in bags, and rented a car a couple of days later. Raul drove to a remote, deserted area on the island and threw the dismembered body into the sea from a rocky point. Authorities searched the shoreline for weeks, scouring the areas where Raul claimed he had disposed of the remains. Divers were also involved in searching the ocean floor. Tragically, despite massive search efforts involving numerous volunteers, no body fragments were recovered. The case continued unfolding, with Raul eventually being formally charged with domestic violence and murder on January 16. Following a thorough search of Raul's home using specialized equipment and luminol, investigators discovered multiple traces of washed-up blood in various rooms. The investigation also revealed that Raul had bought caustic soda on the internet, a strong chemical often used to dissolve and remove organic substances and old paint. In a room on the second level, further evidence was uncovered. The man had attempted to clean a bloody stain on the floor, but in doing so, he damaged the flooring and decided to paint over the area. According to the investigation, this room is where Raul chopped his wife into pieces. Key evidence was discovered that suggested a violent struggle took place. A broken piece of Romina's fingernail with blood and a layer of skin from Raul were found on the floor, indicating she was still alive and resisting when the attack occurred. Additionally, in the bathroom, Romina's contact lens was discovered stuck to a tile on the wall, possibly dislodged from a forceful blow to her face. Despite their exhaustive search, investigators initially failed to find Romina the body. However, the police station received a call from a tourist who reported a suspicious object on the beach, a piece of lung tissue that could have belonged to either a human or an animal. In late February, forensic analysis confirmed that the lung tissue belonged to Romina. Throughout the investigation, Raul maintained his innocence, sticking to his claim that Romina had unintentionally drowned in the bathtub due to intoxication. Notwithstanding evidence of a violent struggle found in the house, Raul insisted he did not use any tools or objects to dismember her body. Raul's claim of trying to burn his wife's body completely on a barbecue was untrue. There were several reasons why this could not have happened. Firstly, it would have been impossible for him to place his wife Romina's body on the barbecue in his yard. Secondly, even if he had been able to, the prolonged exposure to the fire would not have made the bones fragile enough for them to fall apart on their own without any tools. Additionally, in order to separate the lung from the body, it would have been necessary to open the chest, which could not be done with bare hands. Despite the investigation's proof, it was never determined exactly how Raul killed his wife. However, evidence of a struggle was found in the house, suggesting that he may have beaten her to death. It was clear that Raul had dismembered her body in the same room where he later repainted the floor to cover up the bloodstains. Raul's trial was repeatedly delayed. During this time, he changed lawyers several times. Eventually, due to overwhelming evidence, Raul admitted to accidentally killing his wife during a fight, contradicting his previous claim that he had found her dead in the bathtub. It wasn't until June 2023 that he was finally found guilty. However, Romina's loved ones felt the sentence was too lenient. Raul received a sentence of 12.5 years for involuntary manslaughter, 2 years for domestic violence, 1 year for the physical harm inflicted on Romina in December 2018. which resulted in her hospitalization and several months for physical abuse. The combined punishment for all the offenses was almost 16 years in prison. Raul is currently serving his sentence, but at the same time, he is trying to have the court's decision overturned by filing appeals. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and they lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christy was 14, she enjoyed spending time with her friends and sisters. They enjoyed going swimming at a nearby community, especially on hot days. Occasionally, Christy also babysat for families she knew. On August 22nd, a friend of Christy's asked her to babysit her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christy woke up around noon, and it was an extremely hot day, with temperatures reaching 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So Christy decided that a swim would be a great way to relax and cool off. She brought her younger sister, Kim, to the community with her. Kim jumped right into the water while Christy chose to relax on a lounge chair. A while later, her friend came to chat, and after a short conversation, the two left together. Kim was surprised when her sister, Christy, left her alone without saying a word. Instead of following her, Kim chose to stay at the pool. Later, when she returned home, her sister had not returned. After several hours without any sign of Christy, Kim began to worry. She decided to search the neighborhood for her sister and soon met a neighbor. The neighbor informed her that about an hour ago, the police had discovered the body of a little girl a few miles away, but they had not yet identified her. Kim rushed home to inform her parents of the situation. They quickly contacted the police, saying that their daughter was missing. The police advised them to go to the morgue, where they would show them the body of the dead girl. Initially, her parents had difficulty recognizing the girl because of the severe bruising on her face. However, the mother later discovered a birthmark on the girl's leg and recognized it as Christy. After identifying the girl, the police informed the shocked family of what had happened. At around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report that he had found a human body in the woods behind the shopping center. He and his wife and son had gone there to buy toys for their children. Before entering the shopping center, the son asked to walk along a popular trail in the woods behind the building. This trail leads to a nearby river, which attracts casual walkers. After agreeing to let the boy walk, the parents allowed him to follow this path into the woods. When the family returned, they noticed a suspicious scene a short distance from the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man lying on the ground, bending over someone and hitting them with a piece of wood. When the man discovered the family, he immediately got up and ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was studying medicine, tried to check for a pulse but could not find one. The father quickly ran to a nearby shopping mall and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided police with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young man, about 20 years old, tall and slim, with shoulder-length black hair. He was wearing jean shorts and boots at the time of the incident. Using this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and turned it over to patrol officers. The crime scene examination did not turn up any significant clues. Although police discovered a piece of wood that was used as the murder weapon, they were unable to find any evidence that could identify the perpetrator. Notable details from the crime scene included that Christie's hands were tied with telephone cords and that her clothing was in disarray, as her bikini top was pulled down and her t-shirt and shoes were found nearby. However, forensic analysis did not reveal any evidence of sexual assault. Police therefore theorized that the perpetrator may have intended to attack Christie, but something frightened him and he ran away. Christie's sister reported to police that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol. So they went to speak with Carol. Carol reported that she had received a suspicious phone call that day from an unidentified man claiming to be a local radio DJ. He told her about a cheerleading competition that was supposed to take place in their town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. The caller invited her to meet at the entrance to a forest trail behind the mall, where someone would provide more information about the event, which was supposed to start at 1:45 p.m. Carol's account of the events aroused the suspicions of the police. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they encounter Christie and her sister. After a brief conversation, Carol invites Christie to come with her instead, and they decide to leave their sisters behind and head to the mall. When they reach the entrance to the woods, the girls sit on a fence and wait for someone to arrive. When no one appears after a while, Carol says she left Christie for a while to go to the mall and asks for the time. She returns a few minutes later, only to find Christie gone. Still waiting for a while longer, Christie does not reappear, prompting Carol to finally leave. The police investigation finds no evidence of cheerleading competitions in town, as the anonymous caller had reported. This leads them to two possible explanations. The caller could be the killer trying to lure Carol into the woods, or it could be a prank unrelated to the murder. Unfortunately, the call cannot be traced, making it impossible to identify the caller. Further investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Carol's story. According to Carol, she had met Christie and her sister on the street while walking to the mall. However, Christie's sister, Kim, disputed this claim, saying that she and Christie were at the pool and that Carol had joined them there. But that was not all. Later that evening, Christie's mother met Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol apologized and said that things had gone too far. She said that she was supposed to be the target and that there were two people involved in the murder. However, when Christie's mother tried to get more information, Carol ended the conversation and left. The mother reported this to the police, who questioned Carol again. But Carol denied making these statements, maintaining that her original story was true. She later took a lie detector test, but showed no signs of deception when asked questions critical to Christie's case. As a result, the police took her off the suspect list and focused on finding other leads. The city was thrown into a state of widespread fear as news of the brutal murder spread in the days that followed. This fear was compounded by a disturbing realization: the police suspected the killer was a local resident, as they seemed to have a good understanding of the area behind the shopping center. Spurred on by this new information, the police launched a massive investigation, using every available resource. Their efforts were finally rewarded 3 days after Christie's murder, when a significant breakthrough was made in the case. At approximately 5 p.m., a Columbus Police Patrol officer spotted a man who closely resembled the composite sketch of Christie's killer. The patrol officer quickly notified the case officers, who arrived at the scene and asked the man to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, 25-year-old Jack Carmen, agreed to cooperate. However, the police faced a problem. Jack had a significant intellectual disability, with an IQ estimated at around 50, according to various tests. Because of his condition, Jack required specialized medical care and lived in an apartment provided by a nonprofit organization. He had difficulty with basic skills, including reading, writing, and speaking. Despite these challenges, the police on the Christie case could not ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. Jack's interrogation was difficult and exhausting. Most of the time, he responded with short answers or remained silent. The police began to question whether Jack fully understood the meaning behind their questions. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. Eventually, the police began to make some progress by asking the simplest and most specific questions possible. Using this approach, they were able to extract a confession from Jack. Jack stated that on the day of the incident, he began by leaving his apartment and taking a bus to the mall. His intention was to buy clothes, specifically pants and shirts. When he arrived at the mall, he walked across the parking lot toward the entrance and saw Christy sitting on a fence near a trail leading into the woods. Jack approached Christy, grabbed her, held her arms, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. After the assault, Christy attempted to flee. Jack caught up with her, picked up a nearby log, and repeatedly hit her on the head. He then fled the scene, running to the main road in front of the shopping center, where he boarded another bus. The next day, the police took Jack to the woods, where he identified the exact location of the crime scene. Jack also shared specific details with the police, such as the log breaking in half when it hit Christy, which only the perpetrator would know. The police assembled a lineup that included Jack and asked the couple who found Christy to identify the person they saw at the scene on the day of the crime. Both identified Jack. Jack was then formally charged with assault and murder. Although forensic experts found no evidence to confirm his testimony, Jack still confessed to committing sexual assault during the crime. Therefore, the prosecution decided not to dismiss the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty. However, Jack and his attorney opted for a plea bargain. Jack admitted his guilt to the judge, and as a result, he was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial was quick, possibly due to the public interest in the case, with thousands of people following the proceedings. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack Carman was officially sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, public perception of Jack's guilt began to change. As more information about his confession and personal life emerged in the media, many began to question whether he was truly capable of committing such a crime. Those close to Jack never suspected his involvement in the crime, describing him as a non-aggressive and timid person who often lied when forced to lie. And an incident at a charity center where he took the blame for a broken boiler, even though someone else had done it. Jack's ability to honestly confess to the crime has also been questioned. Although he had significant difficulty speaking, police claimed that Jack provided a detailed description of the crime. However, those who knew Jack's suspect at the police guided him by asking leading questions that included relevant facts from the case. This means that if they asked, "Did you hit the victim with a piece of wood?" and Jack answered, "Yes," it could be misinterpreted as a confession. A woman involved in Jack's treatment revealed that when pressed, Jack would confess to anything. If he was threatened with the electric chair, he would likely comply with whatever the police asked him to do. Those who support Jack's innocence have also found that the police brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, the couple who later identified him at the police station. They had seen Jack and knew he was the suspect. However, the police maintained that the couple had never met Jack, a claim that many found hard to believe. Several other events raised serious doubts about Jack's involvement in the case. Police were unable to find the bus driver or any passengers who could confirm that Jack was on the bus he claimed to have taken home, as stated in his confession. Furthermore, several people at the charity building where Jack lived and worked gave testimony. They reported seeing Jack at 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, it is unlikely that he would have taken the bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of town and committed the murder at 1:50 p.m. He would have had to have taken the bus to the outskirts of town, which would have taken at least 40 minutes. Even if he had left immediately after being seen, the timestamps do not match. This led many to question Jack's guilt and believe that the police pressured him into a false confession. Even Christie's parents began to suspect that Jack was not the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. A public committee was formed to fight for justice. This led to Jack finding new representation, as his new lawyer quickly filed a petition for a review of the case. A few months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt almost from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. Christ's father, Norman Mills, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway, dissatisfied with the police's efforts to find his daughter's killer. Not wanting to rely solely on the police, he took it upon himself to seek answers. Shortly after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the woods, where they discovered a pair of bloody jean shorts and men's underwear. They turned these items over to the police, who initially ignored them during their investigation. However, it remains unknown whether these items were connected to the case or were even tested. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense team had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to identify the real killer. They suspected Henry Newell, the 25-year-old man who had discovered Christ's body along with his wife, as a suspect. When the trial began, Jack's lawyers compiled a long list of reasons to suspect Henry of the murder, and the list continued to grow throughout the trial. Henry initially gained attention for his extensive criminal record. As a teenager, Henry had been in trouble with the law several times, leading to 3 prison terms. Notably, he escaped from prison twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, Henry was serving his 4th prison sentence for arson in order to collect insurance money. Furthermore, when lawyers reviewed the evidence from Christ's case, they discovered several suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry claimed to have discovered the body, approached it, and tossed aside a piece of bloody wood. Although he explained that he was in shock at the time, this action still raised many questions. It is unclear why Henry would have picked up the murder weapon and moved it away from the body without any logical reason. He also claimed that he thought the girl was still alive and tried to save her by taking off his shirt and holding it to her face. This action was also suspicious, as it was unclear whether Henry was actually trying to stop the bleeding or if his shirt had become stained with blood during the killing, causing him to create an alibi for the stains. Jack's lawyer found a store employee at the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said that he was not wearing a shirt but jean shorts. However, when the police arrived, Henry had changed into a different pair of pants. The employee also reported that Henry had a new, obvious bruise on his face, indicating that he had been beaten by someone. When asked why this detail was not disclosed to the police immediately, the employee said that no one asked her specifically about it. The police themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it at the time. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but ended up vomiting into the machine, rendering the test uncompleted. The police did not conduct any further tests. Henry's neighbor was another key witness. He reported seeing fresh scratches on Henry's hands as they spoke on the night of the murder. The neighbor also claimed to have seen a telephone cord in Henry's garage that matched the cord used to tie the victim's hands. Furthermore, the neighbor shared a disturbing story that Henry had told him. Henry claimed that he knew Carol, Christ's 14-year-old friend, and that they had swum naked in the pool together when Henry was 25. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case, as it revealed a disturbing relationship between Henry and Carol. While there was no concrete evidence to support this claim, it did suggest that Henry knew Carol, who was directly involved in the case. His wife Pam also testified in court. She said that everything happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. She explained that the family had gone to the mall and their son had wanted to go for a walk, which led them to the woods where they discovered the body. From that point on, Henry remained at home, only leaving briefly to chase away neighborhood kids who were throwing fireworks into their yard. Henry was brought from jail to testify in court, where he stuck to his original story and maintained his innocence in the case. One of the most important moments of the trial was the playing of the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching the recording, it became clear that Jack had been pressured by the police to confess to the murder. Jack barely spoke and seemed to have no idea what the police wanted from him. However, a more dramatic development occurred on the fifth day of the trial when a surprise witness appeared, a testimony that neither the prosecution nor Jack's attorneys had anticipated. The surprise witness was Henry's stepson, Bobby, and his statements would shock those following the case. The boy explained what had really happened that day. Henry had left the house to scare away some kids who were throwing firecrackers in their yard, but Henry had not only been out for a few minutes as his mother had said. Henry had been gone for more than half an hour. When Henry returned, he had lost his shirt and slippers and had scratches on his face and arms. Henry then spoke privately with Pam before telling Bobby that they were all going to the mall. However, instead of going shopping, Henry and Pam took Bobby to a nearby trail, where he had not asked to go for a walk. In the woods, they found one of Henry's torn slippers, and a little further, they came across Christ's body. Henry's mother told Bobby to keep what he had seen a secret. Years later, after talking to his biological father, Bobby decided it was time to reveal the truth. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange incident involving Henry that occurred at Christ's funeral. On the way back, she said that it was a tragedy, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep quiet." In addition, a friend of Henry's testified that he had confessed to killing Christ. According to this friend, Henry claimed that the act was unintentional, not intentional. In the end, this trial left little doubt that Jack was not involved in the crime, and all charges against him were eventually dropped. But this is where things get interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing the case against him. The prosecutor criticized the police for ignoring many clues and evidence that were available from the beginning of the investigation. This criticism was met with widespread public outrage. As a result, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case 2 days later. However, there was still a major problem. The new investigation relied heavily on the initial findings, including the statements of Henry and Pam. As a result, the police continued to operate under the initial assumption that Christie's body had been discovered in the woods with a long-haired shirtless man nearby. They focused on finding new suspects who fit this description, similar to Jack. Unsurprisingly, this approach yielded no results. Despite months of continued efforts, the case eventually stalled. Christie's father pursued justice relentlessly. He even filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, not because he thought Jack was guilty, but to gain access to the case files. By doing so, he hoped to gather more information about the case. Unfortunately, this effort was ultimately unsuccessful. Christie's father died of cancer in 2006, still without the answers he was looking for. For years, the investigation into Christie's murder went dormant, until 2013 when former attorney John Allard decided to reopen the case. John took the investigation into his own hands and contacted everyone involved, looking for new leads. Christie's family gave him a box full of her father's files, compiled over the years until his death. After reviewing the documents and speaking to dozens of people, John became convinced that the killer was none other than Henry. During the investigation, John discovered that Christie's friend Carol smoked marijuana and found evidence that she had purchased marijuana from Henry. This connection led John to suspect that Carol may have fabricated the story about meeting a DJ in the woods, and that she may have planned to meet Henry to buy marijuana instead. It is possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a convincing excuse. Alternatively, a darker scenario emerged, in which Carol may have acted on Henry's behalf, luring Christie into the woods to attack her. And Henry had scratches and bruises on his body, suggesting that Christie had fought back before she died. As John continued to investigate the case, he discovered that Henry had committed many other crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. Another notable incident involved the death of Henry's wife, Pam, in 1982. Despite filing for divorce, Pam was still living with Henry when she was found dead in their apartment. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills. However, Pam's family members were skeptical and suggested that Henry may have altered the pills. What was even more unusual was that, although Pam had clearly consumed a large amount of sleeping pills, no packaging for the pills was found in the apartment, as she would have been unable to dispose of them after taking such a large amount. In 2013, Henry died of cancer at the age of 63, but John persisted in his quest for justice for Christie. He published a book compiling all the available information about the case, which sparked public interest. Christie's family, along with others, have called for the investigation to be reopened. Notably, some of Henry's relatives contacted John, confessing that their entire family knew Henry was the one who killed Christie but kept quiet. A family member of Henry's recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry gave her a car as a gift and they went for a drive together. At one point, he asked her to stop the car, turned to her and confessed to killing Christie, describing the crime in detail. The woman did not believe him, thinking he had made up the story because he had been drinking heavily. However, after reading a book about the case, the woman's memory of that conversation returned and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. This revelation eventually led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. The police thoroughly reinvestigated the case for several months, re-interviewing many witnesses and re-evaluating potential leads. A significant breakthrough came from Henry's confession to a family member, in which he claimed to have assaulted Christie. Initially, medical experts found no evidence to support this claim. However, using modern technology, police re-examined Christie's clothing and discovered small, previously undetected semen stains. Unfortunately, these stains were too small to extract enough DNA for analysis. The investigation dragged on until late 2015, when police held a press conference to announce their findings. 40 years after the murder, they finally announced that Henry was the one who committed the crime. However, since he was no longer alive, they were unable to take the case to court. As a result, the case was officially declared solved. Although some details of the crime remain unclear due to the lack of a confession, police felt confident that they understood the general circumstances surrounding the murder. It is possible that Henry went to the trail behind the shopping center after leaving his home. Carol may have asked him to meet her there to buy marijuana, but this has not been confirmed. When he arrived, he encountered Christie, who was alone, and decided to attack her. He tied her hands with telephone cords and took her deeper into the woods. Christie defended herself, scratching Henry and hitting him in the face. Henry may have then wrestled her to the ground and killed her with a nearby log. After the attack, Henry returned home and told his wife what had happened. Together, they devised a plan that would allow him to avoid being held accountable for his actions. Carol's involvement in the case remains unclear, and it's possible she will speak out one day. A recent press conference revealed that the police mishandled the case years ago, with the current police apologizing to the Christie family for the negligence of their predecessors. The initial evidence was enough to charge Henry with murder. But it appears the original police chose to ignore it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel Anderson. Rachel Anderson is a 24-year-old female born on January 28, 1994, in Warren, Ohio, to William Bill Anderson and Patricia Trish Anderson. She has a younger brother named John, who was favored by the family. Rachel graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2012, where she was a member of the National Honor Society and played on the soccer and volleyball teams. From a young age, Rachel aspired to become a funeral director, a unique career choice. She moved on to Youngstown State University, focusing on the study of deceased individuals. Her dedication to her studies earned her recognition as one of the top students, along with a scholarship. Following this, she attended the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, graduating in 2016 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mortuary Science. After joining the Ohio Funeral Directors Association, Rachel relocated to Columbus to start her internship at Shaw Davis Funeral Home. She took her role seriously, believing it was her responsibility to help the families of the deceased. As her internship was nearing its conclusion, Rachel hoped to become a permanent employee at the funeral home. However, her dream was suddenly and tragically shattered. Rachel's body was taken to the morgue, and investigators began interviewing the first witnesses. The autopsy on Rachel revealed the details of the brutal assault she suffered that night. She had been both strangled and stabbed. Specifically, she had a cut on her scalp and fractures at the base of her skull. The stab wound entered through the back of her neck and penetrated the left side of her brain, indicating extreme force that caused a portion of her skull to break off. The autopsy also found that she had been strangled with a cord from an electric blanket. The strangulation caused bleeding in her sternoclavicular muscles and eyelids, and the blood vessels in her eyes had burst, leading to noticeable redness. Forensic evidence revealed bruises and red marks on her ankles and wrists, indicating she was alive when the perpetrator tied her up. A DNA sample was discovered on the rope and Rachel's body. The coroner who conducted Rachel's autopsy determined that her death resulted from a stab wound to the head and neck, despite the initial theory suggesting strangulation. After interviewing various employees from Rachel's workplace and her ex-boyfriend, who had an alibi, the police continued to explore different possibilities regarding the attack. Detectives returned to Rachel's apartment to search for evidence or clues about the perpetrator. On the living room floor, they discovered Rachel's purse, which was missing her wallet. 2 weeks after the crime, Rachel's mother found the 9-inch steak knife used to stab her in a box in her apartment. However, the brutal nature of Rachel's torture suggests that the perpetrator was not simply a thief, but a psychopath who enjoyed abusing his power over his victims. Investigators explored various motives, but initially had no suspects. The details of Rachel's death were kept confidential to protect the investigation. Eventually, DNA samples were collected from different parts of Rachel's body and the crime scene. Unfortunately, these samples did not match any samples in the Special Services database. The video footage from street surveillance cameras captured 2 individuals using Rachel's car to drive around the city after her death. During this period, cash was withdrawn from her debit and credit cards. Location data identified a phone number that was in Rachel's apartment between 7:59 p.m. and 9:25 p.m. on January 28, 2018. Analyzing the evidence revealed the caller's whereabouts at various times. Once the account associated with the phone number was identified, investigators found the suspect, 54-year-old Anthony Pardon. He had a criminal history that included multiple rapes, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Overall, he served 33 years in prison for his crimes. Anthony had a difficult upbringing. He was initially raised by his grandparents and later moved in with his mother. As a child, he was diagnosed with conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder. In March 1979, at the age of 14, Anthony was briefly committed to the Ohio Youth Commission. By July of the same year, he was placed under court custody and transferred to Franklin County Children's Services. In December, he was again found guilty of making threats, leading to another transfer to the Ohio Youth Commission, where he was placed in foster care. In 1980, Anthony was charged with abuse, involving his foster parents' 15-year-old son. Then, he informed Columbus police that he committed the crime because he was upset after an argument with his girlfriend. As a result, Anthony was convicted as a juvenile. On November 13, 1981, when Anthony was 16, he visited his girlfriend's 39-year-old mother to use the telephone. During this visit, he threatened her with a butcher knife, assaulted her, and stole $100 from her purse. He tied her hands and feet, gagged her, and placed her in the trunk of his car. He drove to Valleydale, where he untied her feet and threw her into the river behind the Valleydale Ballroom. When he noticed that the partially clothed she was able to stay afloat, he entered the creek and held her head underwater. Fortunately, a passerby intervened and scared him away, allowing she to survive. Anthony fled the scene before the police arrived and used the money he had stolen from her to buy tennis shoes and jogging clothes. In May 1982, at the age of 17, he had been convicted of other crimes in Franklin and received a prison sentence ranging from 5 to 25 years. While incarcerated, he committed several rule violations, such as possessing a weapon, setting a mattress on fire, and engaging in fights. He ultimately spent more than 24 years in prison for his offenses and was released in November 2006. After his release, Anthony relocated to Georgia and applied for a job using a different name. In 2007, Anthony was charged with forgery papers and convicted in Floyd County, within a 9-year prison sentence. After serving his time, he received 20 years of probation and were required to wear a GPS ankle monitor. He was released from prison in 2017 and returned to Ohio in June of that year. According to an interstate agreement between Ohio and Georgia, he was supervised by the Adult Parole Authority and had to report to the Sheriff's Department every 90 days. The Ohio Adult Parole Authority did not give him a monitor, as the judge had requested. And Anthony was free once more. On August 21, 2017, he was found with a sex worker in his car, and 6 days later, he was caught driving without a license. During that traffic stop, police discovered he had a kitchen knife and a shotgun, but for some unknown reason, or due to police negligence, he was not arrested. Therefore, he is still continuing to commit crimes. CCTV footage captured Rachel's car parked outside a store. A man exited the passenger side of the car and entered the store. The driver was not visible in the footage. This makes the investigation more difficult than ever. However, after visiting the store and speaking with the employees, the police were able to identify the man. He was named Slits. A few days later, Slits was questioned at the police station. He said an adult man passing by approached him and offered to exchange his ex-girlfriend's card for cash. He agreed to this arrangement, which made him a co-conspirator in the Rachel case. Slits confirmed the identity of Anthony and detailed the entire route they took on the evening of January 28, 2018, while trying to cash in Rachel's stolen cards. The issue at hand was to locate and arrest Anthony. On February 9, 2018, after several days of track at Anthony's sister's house, he was successfully apprehended. The 54-year-old, who had a history of crime, faced 9 charges, including burglary, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder. The trial commenced on February 4, 2020. On the first day of the trial, 4 witnesses provided their testimonies. Among them was Jonathan, a co-worker of Rachel, who found her body. He, along with the manager of Rachel's apartment complex, shared their accounts. The jury also heard testimony from Officer Frank Scani, who was parked outside the apartment when Jonathan discovered the body Rachel's and reviewed the surveillance footage. On February 5th, Rachel's brother, John, and Special Agent Joshua Durst took the stand. Lead Detective Art Hughes testified the following day, on February 6th. On that same day, Anthony expressed dissatisfaction with his attorneys to the judge and requested new representation. He appeared to be deliberately delaying the proceedings. On Monday, February 10th, the prosecutors called a fingerprint expert and other specialists to explain how technology helped determine where Rachel's debit card was used and at the crime scene. Anthony's sister testified that he gave her Rachel's debit card, claiming it belonged to his girlfriend. She later discovered, through news reports, that the card actually belonged to the crime victim, Rachel. The final day of testimony was Tuesday, February 11th. The medical examiner reported finding Anthony's DNA at the scene, while a forensic pathologist and a deputy coroner from the Franklin County office detailed Rachel's injuries. In the courtroom, the final moments of Rachel's life were carefully reconstructed. She celebrated her 24th birthday on January 26th and 27th, 2018. Her brother, John, traveled from Warren to Columbus to visit her. The following day, she and John went to the home of her friend and colleague, Jonathan, where they held a birthday party for she. After a long night of celebration, Rachel and her brother stayed overnight at their friend's house. The next morning, Rachel left for work, leaving her apartment key with her brother. On the 28th, John returned to his hometown and accidentally brought Rachel's house key with her. At around 1 p.m., Rachel texted John, person holding her house keys, to let him know she would come over to pick it up. Rachel talked to her mother around 6:30 p.m. and then went to John's place to get her key. Since her apartment door could only be locked from the outside with a key, she had to leave it open. After stopping for dinner at her favorite restaurant, Rachel arrived back at her apartment around 7:30 p.m. She then left the apartment, and Anthony was waiting for her outside. He kidnapped Rachel, taking her from the ground floor to the top floor. He used force to pin her down, then tying her legs with a hair dryer cord and her hands with a belt and curtain cord. Once she was unable to move, he wrapped a curling iron cord around her wrists to silence her and gagged her. He forced Rachel to provide him with the PIN numbers for her cards. He tortured her and exploited her vulnerability. Ultimately, he strangled her with a cord from an electric blanket. In addition to strangulation, he also caused blunt force trauma and inflicted a stab wound to her head. Afterward, he concealed her body in a closet, leaving her naked from the waist down with the electric blanket cord around her neck and the door handle. Anthony stole her car and used her bank cards at various stores in Columbus to make quick money. The defense did not present any witnesses. The final hearing took place on February 12. Assistant Prosecutor Amy Van Keulen gave the state's argument, outlining the timeline of the crime and telling the jury that Anthony murdered Rachel in cold blood. In his argument, the defense attorney, Larry Thomas, admitted that Anthony used Rachel's cards but said that he was not responsible for the murder. Attorney Larry argued that the state's case was based on mere speculation. He said that DNA evidence and cell phone data were not enough to prove Anthony's involvement in the crime. The jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, spent about 6 hours over 2 days discussing the case, before finding him guilty on all charges. The prosecution sought the death penalty because he killed Rachel during a burglary and he had previously been convicted of the attempted murder of a similar woman. They opted for the death penalty instead of seeking clemency because of his extensive criminal history. Prosecutor O.B. Bryan remarked that some individuals cannot follow the law, and Anthony is one of them. The sentencing phase of the trial started on February 18th. The defense aimed to lessen the severity of the punishment by highlighting Anthony's difficult childhood, but this argument was not effective. Prosecutors contended that the negative factors in the case were more significant than any positive ones. Additionally, It was established during the trial that Anthony understood his actions when he assaulted Rachel. Testimonies in Anthony's defense were given by his mother, sister, a psychologist, and his former elementary school teacher. On February 19, Anthony gave a 13-minute speech before the jury, sharing details about his abusive childhood. He shared the struggles he encountered after his release from prison, expressing feelings of hardship and despair. He claimed that the law system let him down and that he received no support. And he attributed his current situation to the failures of the justice system. However, he neither addressed the crime he committed nor offered any apology in his remarks. On February 20th, after 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a consensus on whether to recommend the death penalty. Instead, they decided to recommend life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing occurred on March 16, 2020. Rachel's mother cried in court when the verdict was announced. Her father issued a sharing his thoughts on the investigation he had witnessed over the past few years. He was shocked to look a dangerous repeat offender making outrageous demands and acting as if he was entitled to something. He also was astonished to see an adult complaining about the system's shortcomings while trying to evade responsibility. Judge McIntosh sentenced Anthony Pardon to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for aggravated murder and another for violence. Furthermore, he received an additional 63 years for aggravated burglary, kidnapping, aggravated robbery, and several violent offenses. These sentences are to be served one after the other. Rachel's 24th birthday turned into a tragic day. A young woman with a bright future ahead of her had her life unexpectedly cut short. She was finishing up her internship and was on the verge of receiving a promising job offer. Rachel was laid to rest at Pine View Memorial Park, leaving her family and friends struggling to cope with the sudden loss. Every year on January 28, Rachel's family and friends light a candle at home to remember her. Rachel was a lively person with a beautiful smile and a loving heart. She was kind and always willing to help her friends. Throughout her life, she had many interests, but her main focus was her career. Rachel was naturally compassionate, loved dancing, and cherished time spent with family and friends. She had a special love for children and valued her life, which was sadly taken away too soon. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jody Sanderholm. Jody Sanderholm was born on September 26, 1987, in Arkansas City, Arkansas, to Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She has 2 siblings, an older brother named Jason and an older sister named Jennifer, and is the 3rd child in the family. From an early age, Jody developed a passion for dance and excelled academically. She graduated as one of 4 valedictorians in her high school class. In high school, Jody's academic achievements included membership in the National Honor Society and recognition as a Kansas State Scholar and a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar. She also received the David Steinamitzy Outstanding Physics Student of the Year Award. In addition to her academic pursuits, Jody was an active member of the Ark City dance team for 4 years, serving as captain for 2 years. After graduating, Jody attended Cowley College, where she studied pre-med and was a member of the Cowley Tigerette dance team. In 2007, Arkansas City had a population of approximately 12,000. Many residents, including Jody's parents, considered it a safe and suitable place to live and raise children. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jody drove to the college to attend dance practice that was scheduled to end at 10:45. She planned to return home afterward. However, when her mother, Cindy, tried to contact her on her cell phone several times after practice, Jody did not answer. This was out of character for Jody, who usually kept in touch with her family and answered the phone promptly. As a result, Cindy's anxiety increased and she left work early to go home and check on Jody. When Cindy arrived home, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, which made her even more worried because she knew that Jody should have returned from practice by now. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jody had not returned. However, Jody's dance uniform was nowhere to be found. It was not in the washing machine or the dirty clothes hamper, although she usually washed it after practice. The bathroom was dry, which was unusual because Jody always showered after dance class. Further investigation revealed that Jody had not contacted her father or sister Jennifer as planned. She had an appointment at noon but did not show up. Her parents Cindy and Brian attempted to call Jody's friends to see if they had any information about her whereabouts, but their efforts were unsuccessful. None of her friends had seen her after her morning practice at the university. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game with a routine choreographed by Jody. But Jody did not show up. When her parents, Cindy and Brian, were unable to reach her by 6 p.m., they decided to report her missing to the police. The sheriff's office quickly created posters with Jody's description, began investigating her last known location, and issued a comprehensive bulletin about the car she was traveling in. Police discovered that Jody had a boyfriend, Colby Wilson, whom she had been dating since high school. Cindy and Brian provided this information. Police contacted Colby by phone, and he explained that he had been visiting his brother in Texas for a few days. After verifying his alibi and confirming that he was in another state, the police eliminated him as a potential suspect. On January 6th, the investigation took a new turn. Lori Leglider, Jody's longtime friend and dance partner from high school, shared key details with police. Lori and Jody both attended Cowley College, pursuing dance together. Lori reported that she left work at the Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m. on Tuesday, January 2nd, and saw a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times. As she left on her way home, she saw a car following her in her rearview mirror. Lori suspected something was wrong and decided to check to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she turned onto several different streets. However, the driver continued to follow her. Much to Lori's horror, she drove to the local police station and parked nearby, and hoped that the proximity to the police would deter the person from further harassing her. After stopping, she no longer saw the suspicious car and felt safer, so she headed home. However, when she saw the car again, Lori returned to the parking lot near the police station. This time, she waited in her car for a while before deciding to drive home. She later confessed to the police that she had the opportunity to report the incident to the police but hesitated, initially thinking that it might be someone else's silly prank. But it turned out not to be the case. On Friday, January 5th, the Tigerette dance group, which included Lori and Jody, was practicing at the university. As usual, Lori and Jody arrived at the same time and parked their cars close to each other. Lori saw the light blue car again. Moreover, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, Justin Thurber, 23. Lori did not know him but had seen him several times with his brother and friends. Lori and Jody left practice at the same time and planned to meet up later, but Jody never showed up to the meeting. Soon after, several members of the dance team revealed that they had also seen Justin near the university over the past week. He had been sitting in his car in the parking lot, just watching. In the 24 hours after Jody went missing, police conducted a thorough search of the city but were unable to find her car. The fields and wooded areas around Arkansas City made the search difficult. To aid in the search, a plane was brought in to scan the area from above. Police believed they had a chance to spot the car from the air. It was discovered that Jody's cell phone had last pinged from a cell tower near the Call Wildlife Refuge, a large wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, Justin Thurber was identified as a person of potential interest in Jody's disappearance, according to information from Lori Legliner and other members of the dance group. It is important to note that despite his young age, Justin was already known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had faced charges of possession of a controlled substance. Despite being on probation, he had not stayed out of trouble. Justin was arrested in October 2005 for theft and violating his probation. 3 months later, he was charged with disorderly conduct. Just 6 days before Jody went missing on December 31, 2006, Justin was arrested for petty theft and found in possession of narcotics. After posting $3,000 bail, he was released on New Year's Eve. However, he quickly returned to his old ways, and on January 1, 2007, he impersonated a police officer and caused a public nuisance. The police came to arrest him, but Justin was instead taken to the hospital after complaining of chest pains. It is unclear why he was not arrested after being released from the hospital. One possible reason is that he has a relative who works for the Cowley County Police, but this is only speculation. On January 6, a police officer spotted Justin's light blue Cadillac parked outside his parents' home. The officer decided to speak with Justin and was invited inside by Justin's father. When asked about his whereabouts the previous day, Justin explained that he had driven to Winfield, a town 13 miles from Arkansas City, in the morning. There, he met a friend and 2 acquaintances of that friend, whom he did not know well. Justin claimed that the 4 of them drove around the countryside in one of the acquaintances' cars until it got stuck on a dirt road near Cedar Vale. Justin then allegedly walked 30 miles to Arkansas City but stopped after 6 hours due to fatigue. He called his father to pick him up, which his father confirmed, saying that he found Justin wet and dirty a few miles from Cali State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police that his car, which had been left in Winfield, had been returned to him by friends. The police found Justin's story unconvincing but lacked enough evidence to charge him. So they left without taking further action. That evening, the police spoke with Alexis Schwartzel, who had just broken up with Justin after 3 years of dating. They asked her about the places she and Justin had been, and she specifically mentioned the Cole Wildlife Refuge in southeast Arkansas City. The police told Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm, to which she expressed great surprise. During the conversation, Alexis revealed a disturbing fact about Justin. She said that Justin had told her that he had started stalking Jody when she was 13 years old. He would often peek at Jody while she was swimming in the backyard pool. On some evenings, he even lurked outside her window, waiting for her to change her clothes. Alexis told police that she had broken up with Justin because of his abusive behavior, which had become increasingly disturbing. Specifically, she reported that during intimate moments, he would choke her to the point of unconsciousness. Furthermore, he had asked her to hit him, as this was the only way he could get aroused. As the investigation continued, police increasingly suspected that Justin might be involved in Jody's disappearance, despite the lack of concrete evidence. However, on the evening of January 6, Officer Eric Mata arrested Justin on charges unrelated to Jody's disappearance, revocation of bail and suspicion of criminal trespass. This decision was made after it was discovered that Justin had been on university property, where police believed he should not have been. Justin asked to speak with his attorney while police arrived at his parents' home with a search warrant. When they arrived, they took Justin's shoes that he had worn the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were still wet and were drying on a towel. Justin's father told police that he had helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. Police also found the clothes Justin had been wearing at the time but could not use them as evidence because he had washed them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rough terrain began their work at the Cole Wildlife Refuge. They found a shoe print that matched Justin's along with several smaller shoe prints in the area. However, as it got dark, they decided to call off the search and resume the next day. Some searchers on their way home passed the Cowley County fishing pond and stopped to investigate after learning that Justin was wet when his father picked him up. Their search led them to muddy tire tracks and shoe prints near a public restroom. They discovered a letter addressed to Jody's parents in a chemical restroom, dance shoes in another, and a pair of flip-flops. Police found several items, including Jody's driver's license and social security card in her purse, her black jumpsuit, and a tigerette jacket with her name on the front. They also discovered cut-off athletic shorts, a car floor mat, a car seat cushion, and a pair of sandals that matched the footprints found at the Cole Wildlife Sanctuary. After conducting a 2-day search around Cowley County Fishing Lake and the Cole Wildlife Sanctuary, experts with sonar equipment were brought in to survey the lake bottom. On January 9th, they discovered Jody's submerged car. Unfortunately, on the same day, Jody's body was also found at the Cole Wildlife Sanctuary, hidden under a pile of leaves, logs, and branches and without any clothing. Authorities discovered DNA evidence that linked Justin to both Jody's car and her body. Initially, police were concerned that water in the car would destroy any evidence, making the search more difficult. However, forensic experts eventually discovered a short hair in the car. Terry Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Laboratory, conducted a DNA test on the hair found on Jody's driver's seat and concluded that it was definitely Justin's. Barbara Leal, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jody's right bicep and right breast. She concluded that Justin could not be excluded from the list of participants. Although 99% of the population could be excluded. Investigations using cell tower data showed that Jody's phone and Justin's phone were in close proximity to each other on the day Jody went missing. This finding was confirmed by Jody's best friend, Lori Leglider, who claimed to have seen Justin in the university parking lot that day. Further evidence from the university's security camera footage supported Lori's story. The footage showed Justin in the parking lot at the same time as Jody's practice and leaving at the same time as her. Furthermore, the footage showed Justin following Jody in his light blue Cadillac. Additional evidence included letters addressed to Jody's parents, which were later found near the lake. Police suspect that Justin followed Jody home from a university and attacked her while she went to get the mail. He then pushed her into her car and drove away. A key piece of evidence supporting this theory was the discovery of shoe prints next to Jody's family mailbox that matched the soles of Justin's sneakers. In addition, police found footprints at the Cole Wildlife Refuge that matched Justin's shoes, as well as smaller shoe prints that were later identified as Jody's. Along the shore of the fishing lake, they discovered Jody's shoes and other belongings. Further analysis of the footprints in the reserve revealed that Justin and Jody's footprints were initially side by side, indicating that they had been walking together. However, at a certain point, Jody's footprints stopped, while Justin's continued deeper into the woods, indicating that he had been carrying her. Justin's footprints eventually led to the location where Jody's body was found. Justin claimed to have been with 3 people on the day Jody went missing, but when questioned, they all denied seeing him. This meant that Justin's story about his car getting stuck near Cedar Vale was a lie. To investigate further, the police took Justin to Cedar Vale, but he was unable to find the location where he claimed his car got stuck. Upon returning to the police station, Justin surprised the officers by agreeing to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative, Chad Monroe, an employee of the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during questioning. The evidence gathered was enough for a grand jury to indict Justin, despite his claim of innocence. The judge set Justin's bail at $1 million. His defense team attempted to argue that he was mentally incompetent to stand trial, but they were unsuccessful in their efforts. Because Justin had a high school diploma and several college degrees. During the trial, the medical examiner who performed Jodi's autopsy testified about the severe injuries she suffered. Based on the results of the autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Jodi's final hours were extremely painful. She had bruises and abrasions all over her body and face, and the cause of her death was strangulation. The severity of the violent injuries Jodi suffered was terrifying, showing the brutality of Justin's crimes. It can be said that Justin's actions were motivated by a sick desire. And he used a stick to commit the heinous crime at the Cole Wildlife Refuge. At the trial, 7 women, including Justin's ex-girlfriend, testified against him. They all claimed to have been stalked by Justin. One of the women worked with him and had a particularly terrifying experience. After seeing Justin waiting for her in the parking lot after work, she was too scared to walk alone to her car in the dark. As a result, she had to call the police to take her to her car. Prior to this incident, he had left a romantic gesture of a rose and a note in her car, expressing his interest in getting to know her better. In regards to Jodi's disappearance, several witnesses reported seeing her car on January 5, 2007. Carrie Morris, a friend of Jodi's, saw Jodi that day in Arkansas City. Around noon, Carrie walked by Jodi's car and saw Jodi sitting in the passenger seat. The man driving the car appeared to be a large man. Carrie attempted to contact Jodi on her cell phone but received no response. 2 witnesses reported seeing a vehicle similar to Jodi's on a dirt road south of Arkansas City at approximately 3 p.m. One of the witnesses identified the driver as Justin. After a trial, the jury returned the unanimous verdict on February 17, 2009, finding Justin Thurbert guilty on all charges and recommending the death penalty. Anticipating a harsh sentence, Justin's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea bargain. The proposal included Justin pleading guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. However, Jodi's family objected to the deal. Ultimately, the judge reviewed the jury's decision and sentenced Justin to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jodi Act, which included provisions that expanded police powers over stalking suspects and expanded the list of behaviors that could be considered stalking. After his sentencing, Justin Thurbert continued to appeal the court's decision through his attorneys. One of their arguments was that Justin was mentally incompetent. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court stayed Thurber's death sentence, citing a U.S. Supreme Court ruling regarding executions. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court rejected Justin's appeal of his death sentence, leaving Justin Thurber's death sentence in place. Notably, no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The last time someone was executed in Kansas was in 1965. Since then, 9 other people besides Justin have been sentenced to death, but none have been executed. The Kansas Department of Corrections says it has not executed anyone in a long time and currently has no timeline for any future executions. So even if Justin's death sentence is upheld, the likelihood of it being carried out is very low. Jennifer Aldridge, the sister of a victim, said it was surprising that Kansas reinstated the death penalty more than 20 years ago but still has no concrete plan for executions. She hopes that discussions about the issue will take place when the death penalty is reinstated. Justin Thurber, 39, is currently incarcerated at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. The cost of keeping a death row inmate on death row is enormous, with an annual price tag of nearly $49,000 per inmate in administrative segregation at El Dorado. In addition, taxpayers pay higher costs when prosecutors seek the death penalty. The cost to prosecute a death penalty case is about $395,000, compared to $100,000 without the death penalty. Jody's family continues to face hardship and frustration as they wait for justice for their daughter, Jody. The situation is made worse by taxes, which they feel only add to their pain. Family members expressed feelings of helplessness and anger as they watched their tax dollars being used to support the person responsible for their daughter's death. Brian Sanderholm, Jody's father, expressed his anguish at seeing his wages being garnished for taxes, knowing that some of that money was being used to fund the perpetrator's existence. Brian believes that the law should be enforced and that perpetrators deserve to be punished for their actions. Cindy posed a poignant question: if this happened to your child, what would you want to happen? Before she passed away unexpectedly on December 2, 2022, at the age of 63. The family's ongoing fight for justice is now made all the more bitter without Cindy's presence. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of David Camm. David Camm was born in 1964 in Albany, Indiana, USA. He grew up to be a healthy and famous young man, especially popular with women. In 1984, he met Kimberly Wren, a beautiful woman who instantly captured his heart. The two quickly realized their feelings for each other. Nevertheless, their love was complicated by the fact that David was already married to his high school sweetheart. From his marriage, he had a daughter, but he began a secret relationship with Kimberly. Eventually, this affair was discovered, leading to his divorce. 3 years later, David and Kimberly got married. Kimberly believed she had found the love of her life and hoped to spend forever with him. Unfortunately, David was not the perfect husband she thought he was. Only 3 years after the wedding day, David met a new woman, Stephanie McCarthy, at the fitness center where he regularly trained. They initially developed a close friendship that endured. Even after David had a son, Bradley, from his marriage to Kimberly in 1993. During this time, David maintained friendly relations with the fitness trainer, Stephanie. For 2 years, David and Stephanie's connection remained platonic, partly because Stephanie had a lover at the time, but the attraction between them was evident. After Stephanie broke up with her lover in 1994, David seized the opportunity to ask her out. Without hesitation, he made his intentions clear and went public with the affair, openly taking Stephanie to car races, restaurants, and a nightclub. Kimberly began to suspect her husband David was being unfaithful while she was pregnant with their second child. When confronted, David admitted to having an affair with his fitness trainer. This thing led to the demise of their marriage. At 5 months pregnant, Kimberly asked David to move out of their home. He called his mother to see if he could move back in, but she refused, causing him to become furious. His parents' failure to help him, instead siding with Kimberly, left David feeling rejected. As the conversation escalated, David started smashing the kitchen, prompting his mother to call the police. Despite the police being called, they did not take any action against David due to his being a colleague. Instead, they advised him to calm down and avoid tarnishing the reputation of the police force. The marriage eventually ended, and David moved into a new apartment, where his new girlfriend Stephanie joined him, even though she had her own place. This move further alienated David from his relatives, who sided with Kimberly and were appalled by his betrayal. David filed for divorce right when Kimberly, his pregnant wife, needed him most, as she was about to give birth to their second child. Their baby girl, Jill, was born on February 28, 1995. On the day of the birth, David was absent. Instead, David's parents were there to provide support to Kimberly, who had been left alone by her husband. David's new relationship with Stephanie was also short-lived. It ended in March 1995 when he found out that she had been secretly meeting her ex-boyfriend at the gym where she worked. To David's dismay, Stephanie had been developing feelings for her ex again. David initially suspected something when Stephanie began disappearing on dates, and eventually, he discovered the truth. When he confronted Stephanie after she returned home late from work, he became enraged. Feeling betrayed, David pulled out his 9mm pistol, threatening to harm her and then himself. Luckily, he was talked out of doing something reckless. After this tumultuous confrontation, Stephanie left David, and it became clear that she had gone back to her ex-boyfriend, ending their relationship. Following his introspective moment, David reached out to his ex-wife Kimberly to apologize for past mistakes. To his surprise, she was still emotionally invested in him and chose to forgive him. As it happened, Kimberly was going through a difficult time and needed support, creating a perfect opportunity for David to make amends and rekindle their relationship. David took the opportunity, he packed his belongings and moved back in with Kimberly, and also managed to improve his relationship with his parents. They were pleased to see their son think things through and subsequently offered their renewed support. Kimberly later started a well-paying job at an insurance company, while David left his position as a police officer, despite having over 10 years of experience. He transitioned to working with his uncle at a waterproofing store. Turns out, he quit being a police officer not by accident. The real reason comes from the fact that he already has many stains on his record, due to facing many complaints of inappropriate behavior. David changed careers and found that his new job as a store employee actually paid more than his previous role as a patrol officer. His uncle's success in the store likely contributed to this positive change. David and his wife, Kimberly, were able to fulfill their long-held dream of building a home in Georgetown, Indiana. This new house symbolized the healing of their relationship and indicated that everything was going well again. It felt as though life had finally returned to normal. The family was happy in many ways, and David's transformation played a significant role in this. Kimberly noticed that he had changed for the better. He started spending much more time with their son and daughter. However, this positive change only scratched the surface. The reality is David's struggle with addiction to a carefree lifestyle was still present. In 1997, he met an old friend, Michelle, and he secretly began an affair. They would meet in the back seat of his car, but the relationship ended quickly when Michelle learned about David's marriage and children. However, David did not give up and quickly found another love interest. Her name was Lisa, the girlfriend of one of David's friends. David would repeat the same pattern over and over again. He is constantly looking for new lovers, ignoring Kimberly's parents' requests that he change his ways. David was assertive, and also had a short temper, and would become angry if his advances were rejected. However, he would quickly lose interest in the women he pursued and move on to someone new. This dissolute behavior went on behind his wife's back for about 6 years. On September 28, 2000, Kimberly picked up her youngest daughter, Jill, 5 years old, from dance class. Jill was experiencing sharp pain in her lower abdomen, so they decided to leave class early. She also picked up her 7-year-old son, Bradley, from his swimming lessons. According to the neighbors, who lived next door, Kimberly and the children returned home around 7:30 p.m. The neighbors saw Kimberly pulling into her driveway in her car. Kimberly opened the garage door and drove inside, spending a considerable amount of time there. The neighbors didn't know what happened there, they didn't pay any attention to her, but a few times, when they looked out the window, they saw her car was still there. No screams or strange noises were heard until 9:20 p.m. At that time, David was playing basketball and came home late from the game. Therefore, he rushed back home to avoid arguing with his wife and put the children to bed in time. The drive home took about 5 minutes. Upon arriving home around 9:30 p.m., he was surprised to find the garage door still open. As he entered, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife, Kimberly, half naked and lying in a pool of blood, had a gunshot wound to the head. The car's driver's side door was open, and their children were in the back seat. Their daughter Jill was alive, but their son Bradley seemed lifeless. However, David saw Bradley flinch and believed the boy could still be saved, so he then rushed to pull Bradley out of the car. David, a former police officer, found Bradley still warm and attempted to administer first aid. Unfortunately, it was too late, and the child had already passed away. In a state of panic, David immediately called 911 and informed the dispatcher of the tragedy. He requested that all available paramedics and police officers be sent to his house. As his wife and children were dead, David then rushed to his uncle's house, which was nearby. His uncle, a serviceman, was shocked by the news and grabbed his gun to accompany David back to the house. Upon their return, David overcome with grief, and his uncle had to physically restrain him from re-entering the house. Soon after, police and an ambulance arrived at the scene. Police initially believed the murder was linked to a botched robbery, in which Kimberly and her children returned home at an unfortunate time and were attacked. However, there were no signs of forced entry, and the home's contents were intact. Kimberly was found with her pants down and her shoes neatly placed on the roof of the car. This led detectives to suspect that a sexual assault had occurred, and it was believed that she was shot to prevent her from being a witness, especially since her children were also killed. However, the crime scene didn't appear to be a random. Only 3 shell casings were found at the scene, matching the number of shots to the head, with no stray bullets or evidence of a wild shooting spree. A forensic examination revealed skin cells under Kimberly's fingernails, which were forwarded to the lab for DNA testing. Additionally, a palm print was found on the card used by Kimberly. Another significant piece of evidence was a gray sweatshirt discovered in the back seat with her deceased son, Bradley. Based on this evidence, the possibility of robbery was dismissed, although the theory of rape remained under investigation. The police began to focus on David Cam, a former policeman, as their primary suspect, as it is often the closest individuals who are involved. Although David had never displayed aggression towards his family before this incident, his depraved lifestyle became a point of interest for detectives. If before it was just a reason for neighbors and colleagues to discuss, now it is more like a motive for murder. It was rumored that the relationship was deteriorating, possibly heading toward divorce due to infidelity, which may have led David to feel desperate or vengeful. Additionally, a new clue was found just days before the murder: the life insurance payout unexpectedly increased. This detail further fueled the investigation. Interrogating David, a former police officer, was very difficult because he was familiar with investigative techniques. As a result, detectives employed alternative strategies. They pressured him to confess, suggesting all evidence pointed to him, but David consistently denied any involvement. He asserted that he had no connection to the family's murder and never wished them harm. According to David, his marriage to Kimberly was not always smooth, they experiencing issues common in relationships. He candidly admitted to constantly cheating on his wife but claimed to still love her and their children. He expressed surprise that he did not know who could harm his wife and children. He also said that both he and his wife had very good relationships with people around them and that his wife had no enemies. A forensic examination revealed that Kimberly had not been raped, but their daughter, Jill, showed signs of inflammation, which could be a sign of violence or a genitourinary condition, although the experts did not properly note this in the report. The autopsy confirmed that 3 people died between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. David's behavior was suspicious, particularly when he initially refused to hand over his clothes to investigators, but he eventually consented. He also willingly provided samples for DNA testing. However, following this, David began to threaten the detective in charge of the interrogation, claiming that if he went to jail, he would return to kill them all. Forensic experts inspected the crime scene and compared the evidence found with the condition of the bodies. Upon arrival, a specialist noticed a strong smell of bleach at the scene. They found a large bucket and a mop, indicating someone had attempted to clean up blood stains and rearrange the furniture. Detectives suspect that this was deliberately intended to eliminate evidence. Robbers or rapists typically do not clean up after themselves. There were several unusual elements in the case, such as signs of cleaning, Kimberly being undressed, an unknown sweatshirt on Bradley, and Jill having unexplained injuries. These factors suggested that the scene had been staged, and David, an experienced policeman, it is entirely possible to do this. The police had significant doubts about the fingerprints found on the car. The vehicle had been parked in public places every day, meaning the fingerprints could belong to any city resident and weren't necessarily linked to the crime. Accurately identifying the owner of the fingerprints was not possible. Another puzzling aspect was the position of Kimberly's shoes. It had been removed from her feet and neatly placed on the car's roof. Investigators considered two theories. One suggested that Kimberly had taken off her shoes while still in the car and put them on the roof when she exited. However, it was unclear why she would do this. Perhaps she drove without shoes, but David insisted that his wife never drove that way. The second hypothesis is, the criminal could have had a strange obsession with women's shoes. Besides, the gray sweatshirt found on Bradley was not recognized by David. He had no knowledge of its origin or ownership, suggesting it likely belonged to the criminal. But why was it on the child? Based on the evidence collected, 36-year-old David Cam was arrested for the murder of his family, facing charges for 3 murders. During the trial, the microscopic blood spatter on his clothes became the primary evidence of his guilt. The motive was thought to stem from infidelity and promiscuity, which drove him to commit extreme acts. Neighbors testified that they heard gunshots coming from the garage around 9:20 p.m. as soon as David returned home. The prosecution maintained that David was guilty, while the defense presented counterarguments. Experts noted that if David had shot someone at close range, there would have been an amount of blood splatter on his clothes. In many more visible stains. David claimed to have an alibi, with 11 witnesses confirming that he had been at a basketball game until at least 9 p.m. This was also backed up by billing records from his cell phone. Despite this, the prosecutors argued that they had compelling reasons to consider him the murderer. They questioned his alibi, citing his affairs. 12 women he had recently been involved with testified that he had flirted with them and used his police badge and uniform to approach there. The DNA evidence from the crime scene was expected to be the primary proof of David's guilt. However, testing revealed no match with David's DNA. Additionally, the handprint found on the vehicle did not belong his. Despite analyzing all collected materials through a criminal database, no connections were found. Ultimately, investigators discovered 8 microscopic drops of blood on David's clothes, which were identified as belonging to his daughter, Jill. An expert witness at the crime scene initially suggested that the blood drops found on clothing could only result a point-blank shooting. However, it was later discovered that this person was just an ordinary photographer and not a forensic scientist. Despite this, he acted as a forensic scientist during the first trial and drew significant conclusions. Additionally, David's alibi was also questioned. 11 witnesses consistently testified that he was going to the game and could not have been home when the murder occurred. Furthermore, David would have needed to shower and change his clothes afterwards. Medical examinations of Jill revealed that the trauma to her genitals was due to inflammation she was experiencing at the time. This led to the rejection of the original theory that David had perpetrated sexual violence against his daughter. The defense argued that the tiny blood droplets, once considered crucial evidence of guilt, were too small to accuse. They contended that if David had repeatedly shot his children and wife, there would have been a larger amount of blood and bigger stains. They claimed that these small blood stains on David's shirt were from him reaching over Jill to help Bradley out of the car. On March 17, 2002, David Cam was found guilty of murdering 3 individuals and was sentenced to 195 years in prison. He quickly appealed the decision, claiming that the trial had been unfair and that he had been wrongly convicted. In August 2004, the Supreme Court agreed to hear his appeal. However, the prosecution maintained that David was responsible for the murders of his family. A retrial took place in 2005, during which it was discovered that some DNA evidence had not been compared with existing databases by the police. This raises suspicions that there may have been a plot to harm David. The investigators had not pursued other suspects and focused solely on him. After the retrial, police re-examined the DNA samples from the crime scene and found a match with a criminal named Charles Bonney, who had been recently released from prison. Charles acknowledged that a sweatshirt found at the scene belonged to him but claimed he had donated it to the Salvation Army long before the crime and did not know what had happened to it. Charles owned a pair of fancy women's shoes and had previously been involved in 3 kidnappings of women. He was also known by the nickname Ridge, which was written on a sweatshirt that was found but could not be identified. Forensic analysis of the evidence revealed that palm prints, DNA from the clothes, and DNA from Kimberly's underwear and under her fingernails all matched Charles. Before committing the crime, he was out on bail and was a suspect to the police, who later summoned him for questioning. During the interrogation, Charles denied any involvement in the murder and lied in response to all police inquiries. He frequently changed his story. Eventually, he claimed that he had gone to David's house to sell him a gun. According to him, after purchasing the weapon, David shot his entire family. Charles stated that he was still in the house at the time but felt compelled to remain silent because he was threatened with death. He insisted that he tried to escape but accidentally tripped over one of Kimberly's shoes. He tried to present himself as a good person, explaining to the police that he had picked up Kimberly's shoes and placed them on the roof of car. However, he could not account for how his DNA was found on Kimberly's underwear and body, despite claiming he had not touched her. Everyone believed that Charles's claims were false. During a re-examination of the evidence, experts discovered a new set of DNA samples belonging to Charles's ex-girlfriend, which had been found at the crime scene by accident. She was questioned, and it emerged that on the night of the murder, Charles had returned home in a disturbed state, nervous, covered in blood, and breathing heavily. Additionally, he was found to have a gun. Meanwhile, Charles showed a keen interest in the investigation into the murder of the Kimberly family, closely following every news update on TV. This behavior made his ex-girlfriend suspicious of his involvement in the crime. Furthermore, Charles failed a polygraph test. As a result, Charles Bonney was arrested and charged with the murders of Kimberly and her 2 children, Bradley and Jill, but he maintained his innocence. During his trial, he quickly pleaded guilty to all 3 charges on his lawyer's advice but did not provide any details about the crime. He received a sentence of 225 years in prison. Although the murderer, Charles, has confessed to the crime and been convicted, but David Cam's trial is still ongoing. It seemed like it was time to drop all charges against David and release him. However, prosecution began to argue that David was an accomplice to the crime and colluded with Charles. The primary evidence supporting this claim was the intimate injuries found on David's daughter, Jill. It was believed that David had a history of domestic abuse and had also molested his daughter. When his wife discovered this, she threatened to go to the police, leading him to decide to kill his entire family. David supposedly conspired with Charles, who had been released from prison, to cover up his heinous actions. Although David might not have physically participated in the murders, The prosecution argued that he incited Charles to commit the act and served as the ideological mastermind behind it. During the new trial, David denied all these allegations. Another forensic expert examined Jill's body and confirmed that there was no evidence of violence. Instead, the inflammation was linked to a medical condition. The defense argued that David and Charles had never met, had no mutual acquaintances, and there was no correspondence, phone calls, or any other form of communication between them. On March 6, 2006, David was once again found guilty of murdering his family and was sentenced to life in prison. He immediately filed an appeal, particularly upset that the new charges included sexual abuse of his own daughter. However, the prosecution failed to present any evidence of violence. The appellate court reviewed the case materials and again ruled in favor of David, citing insufficient evidence to uphold the original sentence. It was revealed that the previous prosecutor, who was accusing David, had a financial interest in the case because he was under contract to write a book about it. This thing of interest compromised his objectivity. A new prosecutor took over the case, leading to the discovery of new evidence. A photographer, who had testified in the first two trials as an expert, admitted to lying about his qualifications and revealed that he was not a forensic scientist. Further analysis of the DNA samples confirmed that Charles had left traces at the crime scene and on the victims. Despite this evidence, David continued to face accusations, with the financial motive being highlighted. He had collected $750,000 in life insurance after his wife's death. Ultimately, on October 24, 2013, David Camm was acquitted of all charges. Nevertheless, there remained some who were convinced of his guilt, as well as those who believed in his innocence. Following his acquittal, David Camm filed a lawsuit against the county, seeking $30 million in damages for the emotional distress he suffered. The judge acknowledged that the state's experts had reasonably concluded that the blood spatter indicated David's involvement and asserted that no police officer had intentionally tried to frame him. David was awarded $5 million in moral damages for the time he spent in prison. The parents of Kimberly sought payment from him, believing he was still guilty of her death due to financial motives. They demanded a portion of the money he received from insurance and moral compensation. Charles Bonney remains in prison, serving a sentence of 225 years. Remarkably, it took David 13 years to prove his innocence. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Brittany McGlone. Brittany McGlone was born in 1987 to Gary and Patricia McGlone in Gordo, New Mexico. When she was young, the family moved to Winsport, a small town in northwest Texas with fewer than 4,000 residents. After the move, her parents divorced, and Brittany stayed with her mother. Her father later remarried and had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Brittany formed a close bond with her half-younger sister, Hope, who was 3 years younger. Although they lived in different states, the two sisters often talked on the phone and cherished spending time together during the holidays. Brittany was a kind, happy girl with a great sense of humor and an optimistic outlook on life. She helped her mother with housework, cared for her sick grandmother, and visited her father to help care for her half-siblings. Brittany graduated from high school in 2006 and worked 2 jobs at different stores. She intended to save money to attend nursing school. Unfortunately, her plans were cut short when she was tragically murdered. At the time, she was in a relationship with Jeff Stogner, her first love. However, Jeff had a history of using illegal drugs, and he was known for being rude, tough, and rebellious. Despite her family's concerns and her mother's warnings about dating someone like him, Brittany continued the relationship. Their relationship was often tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments, and Jeff subjected Brittany to both physical and emotional abuse. Brittany ended her relationship with Jeff in April 2007, but they stayed in touch. By May, they got back together, which upset her mother. On the morning of Friday, May 4, 2007, Brittany finished her shift early at 7 a.m. She informed her mother that she would go directly to Jeff's house to sleep after her night shift, as Jeff had requested her to come over right away. Normally, Brittany would come home first, shower, rest, and have lunch before visiting him. Patricia was surprised by the sudden change in her daughter's plans but accepted it. Brittany arrived at Jeff's house before 8 a.m., where his family was present, including his parents, siblings, and his sister's boyfriend, Chad Carr. Shortly after she arrived, Jeff's mother went to work, his siblings left with their children, and Jeff and his stepfather headed to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to pick up Brittany's grandparents. Brittany lay down to sleep, needing to rest before going to work. While she slept, her mother, Patricia, kept trying to call her, but Brittany didn't answer. After 8 a.m., Patricia assumed her daughter was still sleeping and didn't think much of it. Around 3 p.m., Jeff called Brittany's house. Patricia answered the phone and Jeff asked if Brittany was home. Patricia was surprised and replied that Brittany wasn't home. Worried, she hung up and started calling Brittany's cell phone, but all the calls went straight to voicemail. Despite trying several times, Brittany didn't answer. Patricia was confused and worried because her daughter wasn't answering her phone. Patricia called Jeff again, and he explained that Brittany had been at his house when he left and was sound asleep. He assured her that Brittany was probably still sleeping and hadn't heard the calls. Patricia then asked why he had invited Brittany over if he planned to leave, but Jeff didn't respond. As he arrived home, he spotted Brittany's car and reassured Patricia that she was with him. Feeling relieved, Patricia asks him to tell Brittany to call her mother when she wakes up. That day, Patricia did not receive any calls from Jeff or her daughter. Later, 2 police officers knocked on her door. When she answered, they inquired about someone named Brenda or Debbie. Patricia didn't recognize those names, so the officers left, leaving her feeling unsettled. Worried, she called the sheriff to find out why the police had visited and who they were looking for. The sheriff asked her to stay home and promised that they would return. Eventually, the police clarified that they had mixed up the names and informed Patricia that Brittany was dead. Her body had been taken to a funeral home. Shocked, Patricia tried to get more information from the officers, but they would not share any details. Immediately, she feared that Jeff had harmed her daughter. Determined to know the truth, she went to the funeral home to identify Brittany's body and learn what had happened. There, she discovered that her daughter had been brutally murdered in her sleep. Overwhelmed by the news, Patricia could only think about her warnings to her daughter to avoid dangerous people. Eventually, Patricia began pressing the police for answers about the events at Jeff's house and her daughter's death. Jeff reported that when he arrived home, he found her car still parked outside. He assumed she was still asleep. However, when Jeff entered his bedroom, he discovered a horrifying scene. Brittany, covered in blood, and lying motionless on the bed. He quickly called 911 to report what he had seen. Patricia did not believe the story and decided to call Jeff herself. While waiting for answers, she demanded to know the truth. Jeff repeated the same story to her. Patricia then asked why he hadn't called her immediately to inform her about the murder. He explained that he was afraid to share such alarming news. When the police arrived, they assured that they would notify the relatives of the victim. Brittany's family was devastated by the news. Forensic experts began investigating the crime scene. Even experienced police officers were shocked by the brazen murder, as they had never seen anything like it before. Blood was everywhere in the room, seeping through the mattress and spreading across the floor. Forensic experts collected DNA samples from the scene, but they could not find a murder weapon, nor any signs of forced entry. This suggested that Brittany had let the attacker into the house, or the door was unlocked. Jeff was unsure whether the door was actually closed. He speculated that they may have left the back door open, a common occurrence in their sleepy town. Her work clothes were neatly folded next to the bed, but her pajamas and underwear were missing. It was reported that the perpetrator had torn off her clothes and raped her. Brittany's autopsy revealed severe head injuries. The medical examiner determined that Brittany had been beaten to death, with the cause of death being blunt force trauma, possibly a crowbar. Since no defensive wounds were found on her body, it was suggested that Brittany had been asleep during the attack and was unable to defend herself. It was also confirmed that she had been raped. The crime was believed to have a sexual motive. Jeff's DNA was found at the crime scene because he lived in the house, where his family often visited him. His friends also frequently came over, leaving their DNA in his room. The presence of multiple DNA samples made the investigation more complicated, and Jeff became the main suspect. He and his father discovered the girl's body and were the last people to see her alive, leading police to have many questions for him. Jeff was taken to the station for questioning. He shared his background with the police and insisted he was not involved in the murder. However, he was arrested for a different offense because he was on parole and had violated its terms. At that time, he was not charged with Brittany's murder. Police interviewed Patricia's mother to gather information about Brittany's relationship with Jeff. She explained that they had only been dating for 6 months, during which time they often argued. Jeff sometimes used drugs, which caused him to distance himself from her. His mother did not approve of their relationship. At one point, the couple broke up, but they later reconciled because Brittany loved him deeply and felt she could not live without him. Their relationship was toxic and unhealthy. On Tuesday, May 8, 2007, Brittany's family chose not to have a closed casket for her funeral due to the severe injuries on her face. They kindly requested that Jeff and his family stay away from the ceremony, believing he was involved in her death. However, Jeff ignored this request and attended the funeral with his family. They were not allowed to attend the ceremony, leading to an argument between Jeff's family and Brittany's relatives. This behavior upset Brittany's family and made the ceremony worse. Jeff tried to share how he had trouble sleeping in the blood-soaked bed after Brittany's murder. Brittany's family was furious and believed he was involved in the case. However, Jeff was later cleared of all suspicion. He and his father passed a lie detector test, and his alibi was confirmed by witnesses, surveillance cameras, and cell phone records. Police discovered that Jeff's phone had connected to another cell tower and his image was captured on surveillance cameras at 2 gas stations. The exact time of the Brittany's death is unclear. According to the timeline, Brittany was killed during the 7 hours when Jeff was not at home. However, there were periods when Jeff's whereabouts were unknown. He could have returned home at any time to kill Brittany or may have killed her earlier in the morning before leaving to create an alibi. The mother was unable to reach her daughter by phone that morning but thought nothing of it, assuming Brittany was still asleep, though she might have already been dead. Additionally, it raised suspicions that Jeff stopped at 2 gas stations located next to each other. The family believed he did this to ensure at least one gas station's surveillance cameras captured him, providing a potential alibi. Because of this, they felt his alibi was unreliable. Jeff's behavior that day was odd to them, and they questioned why he suddenly called Brittany to his place early in the morning. Why would he want her to sleep alone at his house when he was leaving? She could have stayed at his house, and they could have met up later. That doesn't make sense. Plus, Brittany's family suspects others, especially Chad Carr, Jeff's sister's boyfriend. They were also in the house the morning of the murder. Chad and Jeff's sister were out somewhere together, but he has no alibi. Chad knew that Jeff's family often left the back door open, and that day he went home, showered, changed clothes, and then went back to Jeff's house. Why would he need to change clothes in broad daylight, and he had never done so before? Most importantly, he had problems with the law. He was involved in robberies and had once attacked and severely beaten his ex-wife, which resulted in him serving 4 years in prison. At the time he was in prison, his wife had divorced him, so Brittany's family suspected that he was involved in the murder. Brittany's family asked the police to check on this guy, and he was summoned for questioning. Chad denied any involvement in the crime and was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take but failed. However, this failure was not considered evidence, so he was released. At that time, the police had no evidence against Jeff and Chad, and they were not even regarded as suspects. Chad's ex-wife, Britt, contacted the police, alleging that he had abused her. It was revealed that in 2006, he had been released from prison and asked Britt to bring their child to him. She complied, but Chad reacted violently, attacking her with a baton, kidnapping their daughter, and raping Britt. She later filed a complaint, which resulted in Chad being imprisoned for 8 years. After Brittany's murder, Britt viewed Chad as cruel and aggressive, believing he was capable of killing. Brittany's family overlooked Jeff's strange social media posts and inappropriate jokes about murders, which seemed to mock Brittany's memory. It raised suspicion when Jeff's family moved to another house and the murder scene was demolished. Brittany's family thought this indicated they were hiding something, leading them to suspect the demolition was a way to obscure the truth. There were allegations that Jeff had been dealing drugs from that house. It's possible Brittany discovered this or threatened to report him, which might have made her a target for elimination as a witness. Brittany's family called for justice from the police, but the investigation stalled and the case went cold. Initially, the police mishandled the evidence collection at the crime scene and allowed Jeff's family to enter the house, contaminating the area. They also failed to investigate around the house or search the nearby lake for the murder weapon. In 2017, the sheriff and his deputy were charged with falsifying evidence and providing false testimony, leading to their removal from office. In December 2021, a new sheriff was elected. He met with Brittany's family and assured them that he would do his best to hold the criminal accountable for his actions. The new sheriff announced that his team was engaging with several parties involved in the case. The Brittany family felt hopeful that the criminals would be caught and punished. The sheriff and his deputies maintained regular communication with the family, keeping them updated on the investigation. Although Jeff's home, where the crime occurred, had been torn down, the sheriff stated that evidence, including blood stains and DNA, was collected on the first day of the investigation. He planned to re-examine this evidence using modern technology to find answers. The sheriff also intends to re-interview Jeff's entire family and other people involved and seek assistance from local residents. At the time, Jeff was not considered a suspect and was actively cooperating with the police, providing his alibi. Chad was released from prison in November 2020 after serving time again. On September 1, 2022, he was arrested in Dallas, 15 years after the murder of Brittany McGlone. He faces charges for her murder, and the death penalty is a potential outcome. Police collected evidence from Chad's home, including several items such as a pair of white shorts with blood stains, a gray ski mask, and 2 pairs of women's panties. The police chief stated that both old and new evidence contributed to Chad's recent arrest. Throughout the investigation, police always determined that Chad was the perpetrator, as all the evidence pointed to him. However, the specifics of this evidence have not been revealed. Chad is currently in jail awaiting trial and is facing the death penalty. Jeff maintains that he was not involved in Brittany's murder and believes that the accusations have destroyed his life. Many people view him as a murderer, which he finds hard to cope with. His personal life is challenging. He divorced his wife because he cannot move on from Brittany. However, Brittany's family does not believe Jeff's claims. They describe him as a narcissist who only loves himself and think that he tries to gain sympathy by portraying himself as a victim. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Joseph and Olga Connell. The Connell family lived in Wilmington, Delaware, USA, and had 3 children. However, then their parents divorced, which was a difficult experience for everyone. The children stayed with their mother. The eldest child was John, the middle child was Joseph, and the youngest was a girl named Kelly. During their childhood, they often quarreled over small things, but as they grew older, they became very close and found common ground. Their mother also began a relationship with another man who became like a second father to them. The family enjoyed a comfortable life in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. Joseph, the middle son, known as Joe, grew up to be an ambitious and enterprising young man. Although he is often overly meticulous and focused on business, he is also known for his cheerful personality. He has done well in his career. He co-owned a car service and a store with his best friend, Christopher. Their partnership thrived as they were both passionate about their business and focused on its growth. During this time, Joseph met Olga online, a young woman from Russia. Both were over 30 and had experienced heartache in previous relationships, so they were seeking love. They quickly connected, due to their friendly and vibrant personalities, which made them likable to others. Joseph, who thought of himself as a lifelong bachelor, was surprised to meet such a beautiful blonde who changed his life and beliefs completely. They spent many hours texting and calling each other, and grew so close that Olga traveled from Siberia to the USA to meet him. Joseph was thrilled when they met in person. He was captivated by her beauty, and she appreciated his kind and gentle nature. Their mutual attraction led them to start dating, and their relationship developed quickly. Joseph's family quickly grew fond of Olga, as their son was completely smitten by her. She appeared gentle and shy, but beneath that exterior was a lively and ambitious woman capable of doing anything. The entire family adored her, believing she was the one who could finally help their son settle down. Joseph had promised to marry her, and soon after, they decided to plan their wedding. Problems in the relationship began at that moment. The first issue was the wedding ring. According to family tradition, the mother wanted to pass down her jewelry to her son, Joseph. However, the wedding ring had already been given to her daughter Kelly, who had married 10 years earlier. This ring was valuable, worth about $20,000 due to its diamond inlay. Joseph discreetly replaced the diamonds with cubic zirconia and gave the modified ring back to Kelly. He then took the diamonds and set them into a new engagement ring for Olga. He assumed that Olga and Kelly wouldn't notice the difference. No one intended to deceive Kelly. They meant to return everything eventually, but the process took longer than expected. Kelly eventually noticed the difference in the stones, which upset her. She confronted Joseph about it, and he became very upset as well. He felt that she was trying to break family traditions, which angered him. The wedding ceremony was held in the U.S. Virgin Islands. However, the groom's younger sister, Kelly, did not attend because she was upset with the couple and had to work that day. However, she sent Olga a few sarcastic messages about her wedding ring. At that time, Olga did not know what Joseph had done with that wedding ring. The wedding ring caused a lack of respect, greatly affecting their mood. Just a few weeks after the wedding, the young couple experienced constant arguments, especially after someone broke into their home while they were at work. The intruder stole a large amount of jewelry and family heirlooms. Fortunately, at that moment, the Connell family's diamond ring was on Olga's finger, so it was not taken. After Joseph discovered that someone had broken into his house, he contacted the police. Officers arrived to investigate the scene and search for the intruder. To the forensic scientists' surprise, there was no evidence to confirm that a robbery had actually taken place, raising suspicions that it might have been staged. Unfortunately, they would not be able to resolve this case, as a far more serious crime soon unfolded, involving Joseph and Olga. Joseph and Olga began their life together on the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean Sea, where they enjoyed their honeymoon a month after their wedding. They relished each other's company, the ocean, and the sun, engaging in activities like fishing, sailing on a yacht through the turquoise waters, and savoring delicious cuisine. With plenty of financial resources, they fulfilled every wish on their honeymoon. Upon returning home, they purchased a brand new Mercedes convertible, worth over $100,000. Joseph can afford this luxury car because he is a co-owner of a fast-growing car company that brings in about $1 million in revenue each year. Olga, a former stock trader, was well-versed in finance and client relations. After marrying, she quickly joined Joseph's business as an administrator. With her attractive appearance, Russian accent, and friendly demeanor, she played a key role in growing the business. Everything seemed perfect until tragedy struck. On September 23, just 3 months after their wedding, gunshots rang out around 2 a.m. at Joseph and Olga's home in Wilmington. An eyewitness called emergency services to report a woman who had been shot near a condominium in the Dean CL residential complex. At that time, Olga was still alive. Medics arrived within minutes and provided first aid to her. She had sustained gunshot wounds and was bleeding. They rushed her to the hospital, but despite their efforts, Olga tragically died en route. While investigating the crime scene, police discovered another body nearby, Joseph, who had been shot in the back of the head and was already dead. The incident suggested that this was not a random robbery. It appeared that both Joseph and Olga had been deliberately attacked from behind. Detectives quickly pieced together the information that had been gathered by the police officers. They suspect that the previous robbery at Joseph and Olga's home may have had something to do with their tragic end. Although there were several witnesses and neighbors who heard gunfire, no one actually saw the shooting, which left investigators without clues new. Some witnesses mentioned hearing 2 men arguing loudly just before the shots were fired. The incident occurred right after Joseph and Olga returned from celebrating Olga's 39th birthday at a bar. They had spent the evening with friends and family, enjoying themselves until they felt tired. After midnight, they drove home in their convertible and parked near the condominium entrance, unaware that danger was waiting for them. Olga suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her face, with one bullet entering her cheek and exiting through the back of her head. Joseph was shot multiple times, including in the head, and was found lifeless in the bushes nearby. Meanwhile, Olga was fighting for her life and waiting for assistance. The police arrived while helping Olga, hoping she could provide a name or some clue about the attacker. However, she did not respond. Nearby, they discovered many spent cartridges, suggesting that there might have been multiple assailants. The cartridges came in different calibers, indicating various types of weapons were used. It was unlikely that a single criminal would use different pistols. In total, around 20 bullets had been fired, further implying that several attackers were involved and that they acted with confidence. The police quickly confirmed that the attack was not a robbery, as nothing was stolen. Joseph and Olga had a wallet with a large amount of cash, and Olga's bag containing a phone and other valuables was left nearby. She was also wearing an expensive wedding ring worth tens of thousands of dollars. After investigating the incident, the police determined that it was an ambush targeting there. They were deliberately attacked near their home and shot multiple times. They appeared to be a happy couple with no known conflicts. However, the motive for the attack remained unclear. Once the investigation started, detectives interviewed the relatives of Joseph and Olga. Joseph's mother and stepfather claimed that they had no enemies and that no one wanted to harm them. However, it was known that Joseph had a disagreement with his younger sister, Kelly, regarding the wedding ring, which came up during the questioning. Some suspected that Kelly might have killed They out of jealousy over the ring. Did she really hate her brother, Joseph, so much that she had to kill both him and her sister Olga-in-law in revenge? However, it was odd that Kelly was one of the first people to arrive at the crime scene, especially since she lived in another part of the area. She was visibly affected by the tragedy. She actively cooperated with investigators and looked forward to providing assistance. She opened up about her recent problems with Joseph, which she had been dealing with for about a month. She honestly told them the whole story and even showed them the angry text correspondence they had exchanged with each other and with Olga. The messages indicated that Olga suspected Kelly of the robbery, but she denied any involvement and claimed she was innocent in the attack on Joseph and Olga. Meanwhile, it was confirmed that the attacker was a man and had an accomplice. Detectives also discovered that Kelly had been fighting breast cancer for a long time, had recently undergone difficult treatment, and was in recovery. Given her condition, it seemed unlikely she had the physical strength to commit the crime. Despite this, the Armed Forces Police still considered Kelly a suspect, believing she might be involved due to a potential motive of greed. Throughout the interrogations, Kelly did not crack under pressure, yet she remained a suspect for a considerable time because of the apparent motive. At this point, detectives are also considering another theory, that the crime could have been motivated by jealousy. They considered whether one of Olga's or Joseph's ex-partners might have harbored resentment and sought revenge. Investigators looked into the former partners of both spouses, but none of them aroused suspicion. Olga had no relationships in the USA besides Joseph, making the possibility of an ex-boyfriend of hers from Russia coming to the United States to seek revenge unlikely. Contrary, Joseph maintained good relationships with his ex-girlfriends, and none wished him harm. They were both married and had no intentions of rekindling past relationships, leading detectives to dismiss this jealousy theory. Researchers have had difficulty finding a motive for the tragedy. Detectives began to consider other motives and searched for any enemies of Joseph and Olga. However, they were kind and friendly, and they had no involvement in any conflicts. Subsequently, they turned their attention to Kelly's husband, Gareth. They suspected he might have been persuaded by Kelly to commit a double murder. However, Gareth had a solid alibi. He also corroborated Kelly's statement that on the day of the murder, she had been feeling unwell and was recovering from an illness. The theory that Joseph and Olga's deaths were related to criminal activity has been skepticized due to Joseph's reputation. Joseph made his money honestly, and he and Olga will not engage in illegal activities. However, witnesses later confirmed that Joseph was secretly selling steroids. The sale of this drug was banned and he made huge profits from this. Joseph's business associate, Christopher River, was implicated in the crime. A close associate of Christopher revealed that he had often spoken negatively about Joseph, he even accusing Joseph of embezzlement. This stems from the fact that Joseph sold steroids through Joseph's joint store with him, and Joseph kept all the profits for himself. Detectives then visited Christopher, who had been Joseph's partner for over 10 years. They had built their business together from the ground up. They also very close and have been through many difficulties together. However, instead of feeling grief over the loss of his close friend and associate, he appeared surprisingly calm, as if the tragedy had no effect on him. He claimed that he had arranged to meet Joseph and Olga at a bar that night, but then he was unable to come due to work. Christopher also mentioned various rumors about Olga, including rumors of her ties to the Russian mafia. He also suggested that Joseph was not entirely honest and urged the police to explore various leads in their search for the killers. Although there were suspicions about Christopher's honesty, a thorough investigation was necessary. This led to the discovery of Joseph's connections to the criminal world, which were corroborated by several acquaintances. A couple of years before his marriage, Joseph had been imprisoned for illegal possession of weapons. The incident occurred in a bar where a fight broke out, and Joseph retrieved a shotgun from his pickup truck to threaten those involved. After his conviction, Joseph formed new relationships in prison and learned about the steroid trade from some fellow inmates. After his release, he began engaging in illegal medical drug trafficking, establishing himself as a well-known figure in this illicit business, alongside his primary occupation. It remained unclear whether these activities could have motivated the murder. Did Joseph have conflicts with anyone in this illicit trade? Is it possible that Russian mafia operating in the US were involved? Detectives need to quickly find the truth. They looked into some suspicious individuals and investigated a man named Harry Cook, who was interested in partnering with Joseph in an auto shop. By the time of Joseph and Olga's deaths, Harry had invested over $100,000 into the business. This could also be the motive for the attack. Additionally, Harry lived near Wilmington, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the incident. Consequently, the police hit a dead end and continued to investigate Christopher, suspecting that he might have been stealing money from Joseph. The investigation into the store's financial records revealed that, despite a high income, Christopher was experiencing big losses. His expenses were skyrocketing, which raised suspicions of theft. It became clear that someone was stealing money, and it was eventually discovered that Christopher was the culprit. As law enforcement looked into the missing funds, they learned that Christopher was struggling with opioid addiction. He was using his earnings to fund his drug habit, and his income was no longer sufficient to cover his expenses. Consequently, he resorted to stealing from the store, which was effectively stealing from Joseph, to support his addiction. Christopher's addiction had spiraled out of control. He was consuming large quantities of illegal drugs and was desperate for money. He had already incurred significant debts and was stealing from anyone he could. Additionally, he began exhibiting paranoid behavior. He claiming that the armed forces were after him and trying to kill him. His attempts to cover up his crimes only drew more attention from the police. At this point, the police were becoming suspicious of his alibi. Christopher willingly shared CCTV footage with detectives, shows he was at his home at the time of the incident. The police verified that the timestamps on the recordings were accurate, but they still doubted his story and sensed something was off. They then examined Christopher's mobile phone. On the night of the murder, he made significantly more calls than usual, with many occurring around the same time as the attack on Joseph and Olga. Although the call log had been deleted from his phone, law enforcement was able to recover it easily. On the night of the incident, Christopher called some friends named Dominique and Aaron, people who may have been involved in the case. It seems that he was under the influence of illegal substances and wanted to kill Joseph and Olga. Rather than committing the act himself, he hired Dominique and Aaron to carry it out. The case is getting more and more complicated. If the murder had gone as planned, business associate of Joseph, Christopher, would have received $1 million from Joseph's life insurance. When they first started their business, they had a similar insurance policy. If a Joseph died, Christopher can receive a large sum of money, enough to solve all his problems and pay off all his debts. However, he could not access this money because Joseph had married. Following the murder, Joseph's wife, Olga, would receive the full insurance payout, leaving Christopher with nothing. Therefore, he felt he needed to eliminate both Joseph and Olga to be able to get all of this money. This theory is reinforced by conversations between Christopher and two accomplices, Dominique and Aaron, on the night of the murder. Christopher frequently asks them when they will return home, which shows that he is very worried about the success of the attack plan. The responses he received were unclear. Detectives quickly seized 4 mobile phones belonging to all suspects involved in the double murder, Christopher, Dominique, and Aaron. They analyzed the phones using cell tower data, confirming that on September 23, 2013, Dominique and Aaron were near the Josephs' house. The main culprits, Dominique and Aaron, were seen on surveillance cameras which Christopher presented to validate his alibi. However, video from surveillance cameras has evidence that does not support Christopher. It revealed the unusual behavior of he appeared restless as he paced around the apartment, worrying without letting go of the phone. At that moment, he was clearly awaiting a response from Dominique and Aaron. Notably, then Dominique was of great assistance to the investigation, he confessing during police questioning and agreeing to a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence. He stated that Christopher had asked him to kill Joseph and Olga. Christopher had initially provided a $5,000 deposit, then promised an additional $60,000 once Joseph and Olga were dead. As part of a plea deal with the prosecution, Dominique testified against Christopher in court. A year after the brutal massacre, Christopher was charged with conspiracy to commit double murder, Joseph and Olga. Aaron also appeared in court. The hearing started 19 months after the investigation began. Although Christopher had a detailed plan, it ultimately failed. He hoped that the investigation would become confusing and not go in the right direction. He suggested several explanations, including Joseph's involvement in illegal steroid sales, robberies that happened just before the tragedy, and a feud with Kelly. Christopher thought these ideas might distract the police, allowing them to arrest someone else. Fortunately, law enforcement did not fall for his tactics and uncovered the real killers. The police proved that the robbery at Joseph's house before the murder was staged on Christopher's orders. They entered the house to find and steal an engagement ring. If successful, investigators would likely have considered Joseph's younger sister, Kelly, the main suspect in the murder. However, the ring was not stolen, resulting in Christopher's plan failing. During the trials of the criminals, Baron Thompson has confessed to the murders of Joseph and Olga and received a sentence of 45 years. Evidence showed that he was the one who fired the gun. Christopher Rivers, who instigated the crime, was sentenced to 2 life terms plus an additional 50 years. His accomplice, Dominique Benson, was convicted of conspiracy in abetting, receiving a 5-year prison sentence. In this case, Joseph's younger sister, Kelly, has been hurt a lot. Initially, the police pressured her, attempting to falsely accuse her of murdering her own brother, Joseph, putting her at risk of imprisonment despite her innocence. Although she felt upset about her mother and brother's actions regarding the wedding ring, but those issues are just minor controversies. During the funeral, Kelly expressed her deep love for her brother and grieved the significant loss.